We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! This is Uruzi and I'm back with part 11 of What If Naruto Was a Simple Teenage Shop Owner. Things aren't always as simple as they seem. Just because he found himself in a new world, Naruto shouldn't have forgotten this. Now he must deal with fallen angels, devils, perverts and God, all while maintaining a relationship and running his store. Things can never be simple for him. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 37. I need a vacation. The thought was a simple impulse, a fantastically whimsical idea born out of his current misfortune, yet it stuck with him. It had landed and dug its trench in him. And with every word spoken by the angel, it became a little less than a thought and little more of a necessity. Just a week or two. I can have Kuroka man the shop along with a couple of clone. Kaneko can come in office. He sent a glance over toward the dragon. His heart nearly leapt out of his throat when their eyes met. She had been staring at him. He had no idea for how long, but she had been staring. His eyes met hers for a brief moment before he tore them away. God, she looked like she was reading my mind. The thought that the dragon had the ability to do anything involving his inner thoughts was terrifying. He pushed the idea from the foreground of his mind with a quick shake of his head. I could maybe convince her to stay with a clone. Maybe was a strong word in this case. The god could sense the difference between himself and his clones, and whatever that difference may be, she did not like it. A clone would only be able to satisfy her for so long. She would grow tired and agitated of its presence and the lack of his. An agitated Ophis was not what he wanted to deal with. A sigh slipped out of his lips. This is what he had been lowered to. Planning his vacation around an easily agitated god. He reasoned that he shouldn't feel too bad about it. She was a god, after all. Even in her weakened state, she was still a god. And he was just a simple guy. Naruto. The call of his name snapped him out of his inner monologue. His eyes widened in attention while he turned his head toward the sound. When his eyes met with the angel's green ones, their previous conversation came rushing back to the forefront of his mind. Oh, I'm sorry. Just a lot to take in. There was a bit of truth in his rushed words. What the woman had started off with was an overwhelming idea. So overwhelming that he had stopped listening halfway through the explanation. His excuse seemed to appease the angel as she leaned back into her seat with a placid smile on her lips. I understand that it can be overwhelming, but do realize that my father was the god. You may not understand his actions, but know that his will is ultimate and good. What is the difference between your dad and Ophis? She's a god, you know. Kuroka chimed in. Naruto watched as the smile on Gabriel's face shifted into a frown. The angel turned to shoot the dragon a glare, or at least her best attempt at one. The expression didn't look quite right on her cherubic face. The look didn't last for too long before fading away when she turned to address Kuroka. My father was perfect. He was being of unlimited will, strength and power. That would explain why he is dead now. If looks could, Naruto was sure that Kaneko would be dead in his lap. The Nekasha's comment hadn't amused the angel one bit. My father is not dead, Gabriel said in response while glaring at the girl. Kaneko didn't seem the least bit bothered by look sent her way, prompting the angel to shift her focus onto Naruto. Her green eyes seemed to shine in the ambient light of the room as she began to speak again, her tone a lot less agitated than before. He is alive. His spirit lives on in you. Silence filled the room after her statement. Every eye in the room was aimed at the angel. Her face shone with sincerity while she stared at the blonde. Gradually the attention in the room shifted over to Naruto. His drooped eyes and the dark lines of his face seemed to belay nothing but his exhaustion. No. Wah. I said no. I'm sorry, but whatever you're thinking isn't true. He was a lot of things. He was a shinobi, he was a boyfriend, he was a shopkeeper and apparently a father. But he was not God. He had adamantly fighting against being called a god, so he would be damned if people started to thinking of him as the god. But I know it is. The angel pleaded as she leaned toward him. I can feel his grace within you. This is no mistake. His rebirth will lead the world to peace and salvation. It was prophesied. Prophecy. He just couldn't escape them, could he? All the way in another dimension, and that word still followed him like the plague. In the Bible, it is said that my Father will return to the mortal plane. Revelation 21 verse 4, He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. With each word spoke by the angel, the shaking of Naruto's head grew stronger. There was no amount of scripture Gabriel could throw at him to convince him of what she was saying. Your defeat of Hades. Isaiah 25 verse 8, He will swallow up death in victory, the Lord God will wipe away tear from off all faces. No. Daniel 2 verse 21, It is He who changed the time and the epochs, He removes kings and establishes kings, He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. That one doesn't even fit. Job 19 verse 25, For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at last He will be upon the earth. I know, my Lord. I throw myself down at your feet. The angel punctuated her words by throwing herself down onto the boy's floor. She met eyes with him for an instant before the crown of her head kissed the hardwood floor. I celebrate your return, Father. Praise be thy name. Praise be thy name. Praise by thy na. The woman's chanting was interrupted by several loud knocks. At the sound, Naruto shot up from his seat, displacing Kaneko on the seat next to him. Any break from Gabriel was a welcome one at the moment. He was at the door in an instant. He didn't bother looking through the peephole before swinging the door open. We have come to avenge the death of Master Ha. The three women standing at his doorstep didn't get the chance to finish their shared statement before the door was slammed in their face. The remainder of the words died in their mouths at the gesture. Crammed together on the top stair to the home, they exchanged looks of disbelief between one another. He is bold. Ignorant is more like it. Do we knock again? I say we charge in and take back what he has stolen. He is dangerous. Charging in could prove to be foolish. On the other side of the door Naruto stood twitching. The three women watched with concern while he attempted to take in a deep breath. The action looked far more laborious than it was meant to be to the girls as it left the blonde shaking. Who are those women? His eyes cut a sharp toward the sole angel in the room. The boy's gaze left her squirming in her seat. She was forced to take in several breaths to steel herself before she began to speak. I didn't get the best look at them. That had not been the right thing to say. She felt an actual pressure land on her shoulders as the words left her mouth. It reminded him so much of her time beneath her father that she found herself naturally rushing to appease his irritation. But I believe they are furies, primordial spirits of vengeance and servants of Hades. He sighed. He wasn't surprised. This was the crux of every one of his victory. You defeat one opponent and two more stood waiting to avenge that defeat. That had been the law of the land back in the elemental nations, and he had no doubt that it was no different here. The fact that he had killed a god only made things worse. I wouldn't want to be you in a couple of days. Anubis' words echoed in his head. He sucked in a deep breath at the thought. Those words never seemed clear until now. Standing with his back against his door, debating on whether to be angry, scared or just plain old tired, he definitely didn't want to be him. How important are those three? Wah! How much would me kicking their ass into dust affect this world? His crass language brought a blush to her face but got the message across nonetheless. Not very much. They've grown obsolete in the world. They serve as mere tormentors for Hades than anything else nowadays. You heard that, Kurama? Yeah. Good enough for you. Banging on my door was good enough for me. With those words, Naruto allowed the golden strength of the Sage of Six Paths to wash over him. His form became ablaze with the translucent chakra, filling the room with its bright yellow light. As he turned to confront the Furies, Gabriel stood to stare. Her eyes shined with the same light of Naruto's cloak while the blonde began to pull the door ajar. Your glory has never been brighter, Father. I see it now. I see it. Her words were followed by Naruto's disappearance along that of the Furies. The five women, one angel, two dragons and two Nekasha, could only stare at the gaping door that the blonde had flashed out of. The Lord has returned to Earth. He had needed this so badly. The Furies left the grasp of his golden fingers and rocketed down toward Earth. Their bodies cut through the air, twisting and stumbling as they attempted to regain some sort of control, before crashing into the ground below. They hit the ground and traveled in a rolling heap of limbs, wings, and hair. A slow breath left his lips. A small smile began to stretch across his lips while he floated. He didn't know if it was the satisfaction of sending the three hag-like creatures tumbling across the ground or the sage's chakra, but right now he felt happy. The trio of women did not speak as they rose from the ground. For creatures as old as they were, words were of no use in the heat of combat. The first one launched herself up into the air with a single flap of her wings. The dual mass of silver feathers brought her within striking distance of the boy. She struck out with her fist. The clawed appendage soared toward his face, bending and breaking the air around it as it moved. Her attack would not land. His hands closed around her wrist, stopping her in place. He took a moment to enjoy the shocked look on her face before he yanked on her arm. The rest of her body followed along with the pull, sending her head first at Naruto. A smile stood on his head as he sent his head launching forward. His head met hers with a tremendous impact that left the Fury in a spiraling descent. His next attacker wasn't so straightforward. He became aware of her nature when the tips of her claws raked against his back. He spun around and struck out with his fist. He made contact but not much progress. The fist seemed to barely faze the woman if the calm expression on her face was anything to go by. Death awaits you, child. His eyes were forced open when two limbs crashed around his midsection. He looked down to see a pair of black wings pinning his arms against the side. The sudden lurch in his stomach and the blurring landscape alerted him that the forces keeping him afloat began to lose the battle against gravity. The Fury kept her tight hold on him while she forced her body to spin. Naruto was forced to spin with her as the two fell toward the earth. She could feel the boy struggling in her grip. The closer they grew to the earth, the more he struggled. Every failed attempt to break free from her grip was met with failure. Before the duo could hit the ground, the Fury released her hold on the boy and allowed her wings to flare out behind him, lifting her high into the air and allowing her to avoid crashing into the ground. Her opponent wasn't as lucky. His descent into the ground wasn't a pleasant one. He slammed head first, breaking the ground on impact while throwing up a cloud of smoke. His attacker flew high into the air where she was joined by her fellow Furies while the smoke dispersed from beneath them. Be weary. He is alive and well, sister. You're damn right, I am. The shout was followed by a deafening crack that echoed through the clearing. A trio of eyes tore through the clearing in an attempt to find its source. Their discovery would come just a little too late. A black blur slammed into the middle of the Furies. The woman's body was forced upward, climbing through the air at a ridiculous pace. The remaining Furies could do nothing but turn and watch while their sister flew farther out of reach. The shock of watching one of their sisters be whisked away was nothing compared to the feeling of watching the creature begin to disintegrate. Despite the distance between them, the two sisters could see the Fury's body breaking apart. What is happening to her? One of the remaining Furies asked while turning to look at her sister. She managed to catch a small glance of her confused counterpart before the heel of a golden shoe slammed into the crown of her head. The primordial was sent careening down toward the ground, leaving the remaining airborne Fury face to face with Naruto. She was the first to strike. Unlike her sister, she didn't bother with a physical attack. She instead propelled herself backward with a flap of her wings while holding her hands out in front of her. A dark substance boiled around her finger for a single moment before it leaped from her fingers. The darkness cut through the air with a deafening roar toward Naruto. The beam managed to cross the distance between the duo in an instant. It looked to be on its way to piercing the boy's midsection, before one of his truth-seeking balls interjected itself in its way. The beam slammed and was promptly absorbed into the black orb, leaving behind a shocked Fury. How? The creature questioned while looking at the blonde. Those would be her last word as Naruto decided then to send one of his orbs toward the woman. She attempted to dodge the sphere but it slammed into her forehead before she could get away. Her head offered little resistance against the power of the attack, it instantly disintegrating into nothing. Her body soon followed the disappearance of the head under the effects of the orb. After only a moment after impact, another Fury had been wiped from existence. You're being pretty vicious today. Kurama's words played through his head while the truth-seeking ball floated back toward him. I've had a pretty long day. That had been an understatement. His hour-long nap hadn't been enough to recharge him from his misadventures in the dimensional gap. With Gia, Lilith, and now the Fury's sudden intrusion into his life, he had little to not patience in taking it easy on anyone. You will fall, boy. The remaining Fury hissed from below him. He took a glance down at the ground to see the woman slowly flying upward toward him. His kick had caved her skull inward, yet whatever mythical energy she contained was fixing that damage. Zeus knows of you and the treachery of his children. He will throw down the same might he used to slay his father. The gods of this world will remove your blighted existence. The woman screeched out at him before giving a massive flap of her wings. The action propelled her upward toward the blonde at breakneck speeds. Her claws were aimed at his neck as she closed in on his position. Her attack would never reach. As she flew at him, one of the orbs shifted into the shape of a stave. The weapon floated by his head for a brief moment before shooting down toward the Fury. At the speed the weapon was traveling, she had no hope in dodging it. The black stave slammed into her forehead before she was able to see it take off. Before the weapon began to eat away at her existence, she was able to catch a brief glance at Naruto. With him floating high in the air above her, his body shining while enveloped in the golden, fiery energy, the goddess found it difficult to deny his godliness. That grim acceptance was her last thought before the destructive nature of the truth-seeking ball wiped her from existence. The problems just keep building up, don't they? Yeah, they do. He allowed himself only a single moment of rest before taking off toward his house. Hopefully, the angel wouldn't still be there. He didn't think he could deal with her obsessive worshipping of him. As he flew, a single thought flew through his head. I really need a vacation. He had awoken the next morning feeling rejuvenated. Gabriel hasn't been at his house when he returned from his fight with the Furies, allowing him to get some rest. Though, the woman's message of a swift return hadn't been reassuring. He didn't allow that to stop him from getting a full night's rest. Waking up to his own bed next to his girlfriend had been a pleasant experience. Opening the door to his bedroom to see Lilith standing there wasn't as pleasant. He had to spend 10 minutes to explain to her that standing guard all night wasn't necessary. With the ever-present blank look in her eyes, he wasn't quite sure she had received his message. Even now, her hawk-like stare could be felt on the back of his head. When she had heard that her father was venturing into the forest alone for his purification routine, she had decided to tag along. Now surrounded by nothing more than trees, the clone had little else to occupy herself other than the mediating blonde. Just ignore it. You've dealt with worse. Being stared at was nothing compared to balancing on a thin slab of stone that sat on top of a spike that jutted 100 feet into the air out of a lake. He gave himself a quick reminder of such before he allowed his complete focus to shift onto his meditation. Within moments, he could feel the flow of nature's energy connect with his own. The harsh taint associated with it was a mere afterthought to him. With a shallow breath, he allowed it to flow into his own chakra system to begin purifying it. Silence reigned over the small clearing for several minutes as the boy meditated. At first, Lilith was the singular witness to her father, a fact that brought her much joy. That joy was shattered by the soft chirp of distant birds. Their chirping grew louder as time dragged on, the voices of other animals joined them along the way. The first creature to pop into the dragon's sight was one covered in fur. It stopped at the edge of the clear, rising up onto its high legs to observe the stationary blonde. Its black eyes stayed set for several seconds before it began sprinting toward him. The creature managed to get halfway to the blonde before a snake rose up from the ground and swallowed it whole. Leave the animals alone. Naruto's words brought a frown to her face. The creature's mad sprint toward her father had alarmed her. She figured it meant him harm. And any creature that meant her father harm should die. Though, she would calm that urge for the moment at her father's behest. More animals came flooding out of the forest and they all flocked toward Naruto. It pained the dragon to watch the creatures perch themselves along his body. When an odd-looking bird settled itself on his shoulders, its razor-sharp claws inches away from his throat, she nearly ran to the boy herself. Only the blonde's words managed to keep her grounded. While Lilith attempting to curb the temptation of exterminating every creature that dared laid their filthy paws on her father, Naruto was in a different world, one much different than the one the dragon was experiencing. While Lilith sat in turmoil, the blonde laid unbothered in peace. It was the first real peace he had been able to experience in the past 48 hours. It was a peace filled with silence, a silence that filled the boy with comfort. The soft hum of natural energy was the only thing that served as a connection to the outside world, yet even that faded into the background. The ground beneath split apart and faded into nothingness, yet he did not fall. He sat floating, surrounded by nothing, hearing nothing, seeing nothing and feeling nothing. You're really good at this meditation thing. The first assault on his hearing since he reached his meditative state came from right in front of him in the form of a jovial voice, a voice that sounded nothing like Lilith's. He wanted so badly to believe it didn't exist, but he knew he could not avoid reality. With great reluctance, the blonde allowed his eyes to creak open. "Welcome to Nirvana." The speaker sat cross-legged in the seemingly infinite space. His brown skin was a new sight to Naruto. He hadn't encountered many people with that shade of skin. Half of his upper body sat uncovered while the other half lay beneath an orange robe. An array of pink roses surrounded the man's hair that sat in a black bun. "Have a seat, young dove." The man patted the space next to him. Naruto could do nothing but stare at the stranger. The man returned the stare with no hesitation, his face stuck in a large smile while his hand repeated the patting movement. "This is odd." Naruto couldn't help but agree with his partner's assessment. Things grew even odder for the boy when the man erupted into a fit of laughter. "Your partner is right. I was just messing with you a bit," the man said before pushing himself up to his feet. Naruto watched him straighten out his cloak, making sure the legs of his pants covered the entirety of his lower body, before making his way toward him. The lack of an actual surface to walk on didn't stop him as he crossed the distance between them in a few short steps. He stopped about arm's length away from Naruto, shooting the confused boy a quick smile before thrusting his arm out. "The name is Siddhartha Gautama. Most people call me Buddha, though." "Buddha? The Enlightened One. The leader of the Buddhist religion. One of the original sages and leaders of the Age of Meditation. More importantly to Naruto, he was another god." "Hello." He managed to force out with some level of enthusiasm while grasping the man's hand. The two stood shaking hands for several moments before they separated. "Would you believe me if I told you that I didn't want anything from you?" the Buddha asked while raising an eyebrow. The look he received in return spoke of a man who was nowhere near ready to trust a stranger. "I'll take that as a no." He let loose a small laugh while taking a step away from Naruto. In one smooth movement, he jumped into the air and tucked his feet beneath. Instead of gravity bringing him back down, the man stayed floating in his signature lotus position. "Join me." At this point, what did he have to lose? That was his thought as he took his own step backwards before attempting to replicate the god's actions. Surprisingly, he didn't end up flat on his face. Gravity decided to show him the same mercy it showed Siddhartha, allowing him to stay afloat. He quickly adjusted himself into a comfortable position before shifting his full attention onto the man in front of him. "So, you're a god now?" he groaned. He couldn't help himself. He was so tired of that word. God. It haunted him like a ghost. No matter where he went, it hung in the air. Even during the most peaceful moments of his life, his meditation cycles, it still assaulted him. "Ah, that look." Buddha's words raised the blonde slightly out of his internal crisis. "I know it well. What do you mean by that?" He couldn't help but voice the question. The god's words implied a sense of empathy, or it could be a hint that he had another stalker on his hands. He was hoping for the former. "Well, to be completely honest with you, I'm not a god either. I'm just a guy who starved himself for a while then went and sat under a tree." That had been unexpected. Against his own will, he felt his jaw loosen a bit at the man's words. Disbelief ran rampant through his head while Siddhartha sat in front of him. "That makes no sense." He couldn't help but hill the words. "You're Buddha. You have a whole religion based off of you. Buddhism is less of a religion and more of a way of life." The robed man corrected with a wave of his hand. Naruto wanted to reach out and slap the hand away, but Siddhartha put it away before he could. "Plus, just like you, I didn't ask for any of this. I asked for the exact opposite." The man paused to groan. I told them. Don't revere me as a god. I'm a man just like the rest of you. I was dying. You don't get any more human than that." The Buddha stopped to release a pause. The serene look on his face had been wiped away and a mask of defeat had taken its place. "I guess it was sort of my fault for expecting anything different. You get a couple 100,000 people to listen to every word you say and you should probably expect them to treat you like a god after you die, right?" The defeat on the man's face was matched only by the disbelief on Naruto's. He couldn't be hearing this right. This guy accidentally started a religion. How ridiculous was that? "You're one to talk." Naruto promptly pushed Kurama's words to the side while Siddhartha began to speak. "What I'm getting at is that I get your struggle." The man clapped his hands together. I died expecting to experience true peace for the first time, and instead I get sucked into this mess called godhood. It's been nothing but chaos for the past 2 millenniums. So, you're not a god? Naruto couldn't help but question. The curious side of him demanded an answer after hearing the man's story. I don't know. The Buddha's shrug was met with a defeated head drop from the blonde. After a couple of thousand of years, I'm not sure what I am. A human? A ghost? A god? A force of nature? Who knows? I don't. This conversation had taken the turn from interesting to frustrating for Naruto. Just as soon as he thought he found a reliable source for answers and sensibility, his hopes had been dashed. What point are you trying to make? Naruto blurted out as his frustration took hold of him. The point I'm trying to make is that no matter how hard you try, people are going to believe what they want to believe. One of the keys to my teachings was to not revere me as a god. Instead, they built statues of me, a lot more fat than I actually am, and use my words as scripture. Totally not a god. This guy sounds pretty bitter for reaching nirvana. Naruto couldn't help but agree with his partner's observation. He had expected a lot more serenity and a little less frustration for the Buddha. You tell people to do one thing and they go do the other. There's no winning. My advice would be to embrace it and make the best out of it. But Siddhartha waved his hand across his face, silencing the blonde. Quite literally, Naruto found his lips sealed together, leaving him completely mute. I've interrupted my nirvana enough with you. Remember my words, just as a snake shed its skin, we must shed our past and begin anew. I think it was something like that. The man looked down briefly at his lap before waving away his own question. He raised his head to shoot his sagacious counterpart a smile before poking the blonde in the forehead. Just as suddenly as he appeared in nirvana, he was out. His eyes shot open, revealing the midday glow surrounding the forest clearing and the expectant eyes of Lilith inches away from his own. He stared into those wide, brown eyes for several moments without saying a single word. They stared back, an unhidden intensity present at their surfaces. You've awakened, father. He still felt amazement at how a dead voice like Lilith's could convey emotion. Her words mimicked that of a spoiled child to a frightening degree. He shook his head free of such thoughts before opening his mouth to speak. I sat for a bit longer than expected. He let loose a grunt while standing up to his feet. While the conversation with the Buddha felt like it lasted for less than 5 minutes, time had advanced far past that. The sun hung high above him, heating the cool morning air into a warm, humid haze. I have to go open up the shop. The words slipped out of his mouth with little enthusiasm. His newly found passion for his shop seemed more like a burden than anything else in his current mindset. Are you sure, father? The blonde looked down at the small dragon at her question. Do you not need more rest? I don't want you to grow exhausted. Was he sure? He definitely didn't want to go into work today. He had started the day off refreshed, but it was only halfway through and he was already feeling the effects of the day settling upon his shoulders. The dragon's words made him hesitate. Did he really want to work today? Staring down into the clone's mocha eyes, he was pretty sure he found his answer. You know what? I think a little more rest sounds like a great idea. A genuine smile spread across his lips while his hand moved to ruffle the dragon's hair. Due to the placement of his hand, he couldn't see the massive grin that popped up on Lilith's face. As soon as the hand left her, the smile was gone, replaced by her usual apathetic mask. Let's head home. The dragon gave a prompt nod at his words before reaching out her hand to the boy. Naruto looked down at the outstretched appendage. Hesitation sat at the forefront of his mind as he stared at the childlike fingers of the dragon. Only weeks prior, he wouldn't have even considered the thought of grabbing the girl's hand. But after everything he had been through, the random encounter with gods, his adventure in the dimensional gap, his apparent rising into godhood, holding the girl's hand seemed like an anthill to his valley of mountains he called problem. So, with hesitation wiped clear from his mind, he reached out and grasped Lilith's hand. This time he was able to see the bright smile on the girl's face, a smile he couldn't help but match. Embrace and make the best out of it, that didn't sound like such a bad idea anymore. Chapter 38. 5 Truth-Seeking Orb Specials. Sweet sauce on the side please, Naya. How did it come to this? How could he, a descendant of the original devil, be in such a low position in life? He should have been out in the world, fighting those that the world had vaulted as being strong while plotting the death of his grandfather. He should have been adorned in the midnight armor of his sacred gear, unstoppable and immutable. Instead, he was wearing an apron. Valley, truth-seeking or? I heard you the first time, woman. His hands came down hard on the counter while the words left his mouth in a loud yell. His actions earned him some attention from some of the closer customers. Their gazes ran over his body with earnest, yet he could not care less. Their looks were as insignificant as their existence. They never nothing of his life, his struggle and his death. You're the devil that Master Candy defeated, freed from hatred and filled with his love. The sound of a child's voice should be a welcoming thing. Its soft tone and excited nature should have filled him with a feeling of such fondness that even he would not have been able to keep a smile off of his face. At that moment, he was nothing but disgusted. His head turned to face the child. His eyes drunk in the sight of a young boy. At least he figured that it was a boy no older than the age of 9 or 10 standing inches away from the counter. The remnants of a dessert, one the devil had most likely prepared himself, sat on his face and his beige shirt. What did you say? The disgust that filled him dripped from his words. Any adult in the vicinity would have reprimanded him on the tone of his voice, saying it was much too harsh to use on a budding child. If one of them dared open their mouth, he would have directed that same voice to them. At that moment, he did not care. After what the boy said, he was far from caring. I thought the comics were fake. I never thought I would see you here. Before the young child could lift his comic to his head, Valley had reached over the counter and snatched it out of his hand. If the boy was bothered by action, the devil would never know, as he was too focused flipping through the pages. No, 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 no. He repeated the word over and over again, his inner conscience hoping that it would have some type of power to banish the horrid images he held in his hands. But, no matter how much he willed it, the comic wouldn't disappear. The frames in front of him depicted an image he could only describe as an overly exaggerated retelling of his encounters with Naruto. In this version, he wasn't Vala Lucifer, descendant of Satan and partner to Albion. Instead, he was Valachan, a misguided devil who hid his true emotions under a thin veil of aloofness. Despite the utter ridiculousness of his portrayal, the devil couldn't help but notice the accuracy of the actual events taking place in the comic strip. Everything from their initial battle to his humiliating defeat was on full display with all of their detail. Details no one should have had, except for Azazel and Odin. His self-proclaimed supernatural set of extraordinary dads. Those two were the only one who would have had the amount of insight to his misfortune needed for the comic to exist. The information hadn't left him willingly. The fallen angel and God had been persistent in their pestering of him for information. Now I know why. The two had gotten close. At the time, he hadn't questioned their sudden interest in each other. Now, he wished he would have inquired more. Maybe it would have saved him from this embarrassment. No. He gave a wild shake of his head. The moment he had stepped into the blonde's life, he had subjected himself to it. There was no denying that. The feeling had been tame at first, nearly unnoticeable. Now, he could do nothing but face the facts. He had been pulled into Naruto's gravitational field of chaos and there was no escaping it. Neither Odin nor Azazel would be able to help him. Those two bastards were partly the cause of his current misfortune. Valley. Desserts please. He stifled a groan. Complaining would do him no good. If he wasn't allowed back into the Grigori or the Valhalla until he served his time in this insufferable place. For now he would have to bear it. It was with that thought that he tightened his apron and began working. The sweet balls weren't going to make themselves. And if he had any hopes of returning to a life that was somewhat normal, he needed the United States of America. The land of the free. The birthplace of opportunity. The house of Uncle Sam. And his getaway from his hectic life. As the sun shone down on his shirtless form, wrapping the entirety of his body in a cocoon of warmth, he knew he had made the right decision. The golden beaches of California, despite the utterly ridiculous amount of people occupying them, was much calmer than Kuo. The trouble of sneaking into the country was nothing compared to the relaxation he was experiencing. This is nice. Yeah, it is. He looked over to his right to see his swimsuit-clad girlfriend staring at him through a pair of black sunglasses. Her shoulder-length hair sat back in a messy bun while the front side of her pale body laid against the golden sand. He thought she looked amazing. At that moment, he didn't feel like vocalizing his opinion, so he did the next best thing. In one smooth motion, he rolled over onto his side while swinging his arm over the girl's body. She was powerless, or not motivated enough, to stop him as he tightened his hold on her, pulling her until they were touching sides. "It's too hot." Despite her protests, Kaneko didn't make any moves to separate herself from the boy. She did quite the opposite, snuggling deep into his unclothed side. Behind the dark lenses of her sunglasses, her eyes came to a close while a sigh left her lips. That sigh contained a sense of contentment that only Naruto could bring. Without the distractions in Kuo, she had nothing but time to enjoy this feeling. "Father." Her eyes cut upward at the sound the voice. The sight of Lilith clad in polka-dot-covered black and white swimsuit greeted her. The young dragon held onto a parasol that threw a pool of shade over her body, protecting her from the harsh rays of the Californian sun. "Do I have your permission to build a castle out of sand? I will be sure to stay in your sights." Lilith had come with her. She had admittedly forgotten about that considering how quiet the girl tended to be. Despite the power she contained, the girl acted like a docile mouse. Unless her father came under threat, of course. Sure. She shouldn't have been so happy to see the smile that appeared on Lilith's face, but she couldn't help it. The amount of value and care the young dragon held in Naruto's was adorable beyond belief. It was no different from a child interacting with their parent. The fact that it wasn't aimed in a romantic or sexual way was a definite benefit. The dragon gave a small nod before taking a step away from the couple. The girl managed a whole 9 other steps away from the two before she settled into the sand and began working on her creation. "That's the furthest she's been away from me since we rescued her." The statement sounded ridiculous, but Kaneko knew that there was validity in her boyfriend's words. Lilith acted like a mixture of a cute little girl who craved the affection of her father and an obsessive bodyguard. The sight of her sat at the foot of the bed had become a routine thing for the two. "She enjoys her proximity to you." A couple of weeks ago, she would have at least jumped at the sudden intrusion of a voice. After weeks of interruptions and absolute chaos, she was numb to it all. That was why her reaction to Ophis talking over their shoulder was a slow and simple turning to face the dragon. The god stood in a bathing suit similar to the one worn by her clone. Where Lilith's clothes came in the form of a one-piece, Ophis' bathing suit appeared as a modest two-piece that exposed a sliver of her pale stomach and the entirety of her limbs. The thing that capped the dragon's outfit off was a hat. It was no ordinary hat. Its brim stretched across the entirety of her body and much more. Where Lilith had her umbrella, Ophis had her massive hat. Both objects provided an excessive amount of coverage from the sun. "I will go assist her." Naruto gave a silent nod of acknowledgement to the dragon's words before watching her make her way over to Lilith. The cat ninja duo watched as the older dragon sat herself down near the uncompleted site of her clone's developing sand castle. The look of shock that appeared on Lilith's face at the sight of her mother brought a small smile to the Nekashu's face. The subsequent joy that followed that shock only made that smile grow in size. "They're both sorts of cute in a weird way when they act like that." Her agreement came in the form of a hum while she moved to push herself closer to Naruto. Despite the increasing heat and accompanying sweat, the blonde's touch had never felt more comforting. "Travel more?" "Yeah, we should." With their future vacation plans cemented by 5 simple words, the two descended into silence. The forefront of their vision was filled with the sight of the two dragons constructing an impressive sand castle while crashing waves sat in the background. The waves were impressive in their own right, growing and growing till they stood several stories tall. But even nature couldn't keep up the momentum of their growth, leading the waves to their eventual death. The echoing noise that accompanied beaches, children playing, adults laughing and general enjoyment, was drowned out by the ambient sound of their own breathing. At that moment, the connection shared between them couldn't have been ruined by anything. At least, that's what they thought. "Shark! There's a shark in the water." This. Moments exactly like this was why he had a hard time believing God was dead. Moments like this happened to the average person every once in a while, not every other day like it had been doing for him. It couldn't be some odd and misfortunate coincidence. Someone had to be purposely bringing this hell down on him. Out of all the people on the beach, their little group of 4 were the only calm ones. The shared emotion between them all seemed to be annoyance. For a god, her clone, a devil, and a ninja, a shark was not a threat. It was a simple annoyance. "I will kill all sharks for ruining all of this." In the chaos that had consumed the beach, Lilith's impassioned words came off as more amusing than threatening to Naruto as he unwrapped himself from Kaneko, an act that the girl didn't enjoy. He pushed himself up to his before giving his limbs a long stretch, filling the air with the loud pop and crack of his joints. He finished his stretch with a soft sigh before bending down and lifting Kaneko to her feet. Let's not kill the sharks. They were here first. It was moments like this one that Naruto was grateful for the chaos that this universe had thrown at him. While everyone around him had been consumed in panic, he felt calm. A shark attack was nothing compared to the stress of fighting gods. That does give them the right to interrupt our time. He shook his head at the dragon's words. There would be no convincing. The threat of being eaten alive by a shark wasn't real to the pseudo-dragon god. He couldn't blame her either. Well, they're shutting down the beach. His eyes cut over to the approaching police and coastal guards. We could go back to the hotel for a bit or we could. Someone help. My daughter is in the water. He turned his head the moment the sound reached his ears. In retrospect, that was his first mistake. He should have let the matter be. He would have saved himself a lot of trouble if he did. At the sight of the panicking mother, he was already on the move. It took him only a second afterward to locate the struggling girl. She sat 100 feet away in the water. Her flailing arms were the only things of her that could be spotted over the crashing waves. With his mind so intent on saving the girl, he neglected his initial idea of keeping a low profile. The approaching policeman and guard caught a first-hand sight of him running across the water toward the girl. Of course, the only thing they managed to see was a golden blur skidding across the water. The slapping of his feet against its surface threw up a spray of shimmering mist, filling the air with rainbows. He came skidding to a stop to the side of the girl in an instant. Without any hesitation, he reached down and dug his arm into the water. His arm wrapped around the writhing waist of the distressed girl before he pulled upward. What? He pulled again. Just like before, the girl didn't move an inch. Her golden eyes were focused on him, her arms were still waving about and her mouth was still open, yet she wouldn't move. He was an idiot. As she watched the young girl leap out of the water, wrap her arms around Naruto's outstretched arm before descending back into the water, pulling the boy down with her. Kaneko managed to spot a glimpse of the golden scales that made up the faux drowning girl's lower half before she disappeared beneath the water's surface with her boyfriend. He fell for an obvious trap. Kaneko leaned back and let loose a sigh. The feeling was cathartic in a sense, but it couldn't completely quell the frustration of her boyfriend's kidnapping. Think before you act. She couldn't help but shake her head. Ophis was right. A dragon god, one of the most socially inept beings she had ever encountered, had more common sense than her boyfriend. She would have thought that Naruto would have learned by now with all the chaos he had been through. Remind me to. She stopped. It was barely past noon, so why had it turned so dark so sudden? She looked over to her right. Ophis didn't seem to be the cause. The dragon stood at her side, her arms folded across her chest while her eyes stared out over the water. With her massive hat and sunglasses, the dragon probably hadn't taken notice of the change in light. She looked over to her left and quickly discovered the source of the oddity. Lilith was no longer standing next to her. In fact, Lilith could be seen anywhere on the beach. This is troublesome. The Nekasha thoughts came moments before a roar echoed through the air. The sound seized the girl, freezing her in place. It held her, whispering a soft serenade of the trouble that laid in that roar. She tried to shake her head free, but the feeling persisted even as another roar stretched across the beach. She dared a glance upward. Regret filled her in an instant. The blue skies that the sun had shone through minutes before were gone. What obscured it wasn't a bank of clouds or passing plane like she had hoped. Instead, she managed to catch an eyeful of the underbelly of a massive dragon before she looked away. She didn't want to believe it. Why would she? The existence of that dragon flying above her head only meant more trouble on top of the foreseeable mess that would come from Naruto's capture. Impressive. Kaneko looked over to Ophis to see that the dragon had her head tilted back and was looking at the overhead dragon. From the corner of her eye, she could spot a light twinkle in the god's eye. It was hard to discern, considering Ophis' lack of emotion, but something was there. It was warm, appreciating, almost as if she was proud. Pride outside of herself wasn't something Kaneko thought she was ever see coming from the dragon. Now that she had saw it, she was hoping it would go away as soon as possible. Another screech from the dragon's maw forced the devil's attention. A moment later, her arm came up to shield her eyes as a strong flap of the creature's wind sent the sand around her flying. Ophis remained next to her, unmoving and unperturbed by the shifting sands. She's going in. Kaneko peeked out from behind her arm at Ophis' words. True to the dragon's statement, her clone positioned herself toward the water below. Another roar leapt from her mouth, filling the air with palpable anger. The roar echoed through the air as the dragon folded her wings against her side and descended toward the water. She watched as the creature's massive form fell to the water. It was only when the dragon's head broke through the surface of the water did the Nekashu realize the possible aftermath of Lilith's entry into the water. A plume of water shot high into the air as Lilith shot through the water. Splashes of water were sent crashing through the air at the dragon's dive. A particular spray of water threatened to soak the Nekashu and Ophis. Before the high-powered mist could hit the girls, a massive black snake interjected itself in front of the duo. The mist slammed against the creature, leaving the girls dry. Thank you. Kaneko didn't have to look to her side to know that Ophis was the origin behind the black snake. No many other people on this beach could summon such a creature. Should we go after him? Before Kaneko could reply, the surface of the water was torn apart by a massive pillar of dark energy. The appearance of the pillar brought upon a strong gust that had Ophis hanging on to her hat. I think they're good for now. He had no idea where they were heading. He only knew that wherever this creature was taking him, it wouldn't take long. His kidnapper was no slouch when it came to speed. Not going to try and break free. Kurama's voice broke through the screech of rushing water that had filled his ears. A simple shake of his head answered his partner's question before he took a look down at his kidnapper. Embrace and make the best out of a situation. Only a week later and he was finding it hard to embrace the Buddha's words. The golden eyes and sharp row of teeth upon his assailant's face made that task so much more difficult than it had to be. It was hard to embrace the world when half of the forces that rule over it wanted to kill him, though, he had a feeling he wasn't being dragged to his eventual death, this time. Maybe it was the fact that the sharp fangs were attached to a girl who looked no older than 10, or maybe it was because of Siddhartha's words. Either way, he wasn't particularly panicked about his current situation. As he expected, his kidnapper and himself reached their destination in a matter of moments after his brief exchange with Kurama. The water obscured his vision to the point where having his eyes open was pointless, but he felt the shift in the area around him. No longer was he surrounded by the crushing weight of the water. Instead, he was free-falling. The sage's aura came to life around him in an instant without a moment of hesitation. God! He was becoming used to it all. The marble floor that laid beneath him wasn't a surprise. The golden statues that lined the open ceiling room didn't come as a shock either. Not even the massive trident-wielding man waving at him from a cerulean throne could shake at him at this point. Naruto! You came. I didn't have a choice, you know. A month ago, the fear of angering a god would have made him keep that comment locked inside the recesses of his mind. Today though, he was a changed man. Shed your skin and begin anew. We can finally finish our conversation. His feet met the ground without a sound. The golden chakra of the sage kept his movements muted but announced his presence to the world like a beacon. The lines of his face were hard, cemented in a scowl that contrasted the silliness radiating off of the Greek god. We already finished. I said no. A laugh. That's what his response was. The god laughed in his face. A hearty, chest-heaving laugh that managed to fill the room with its sound and amusement. That laugh pissed him off. Our last conversation was rushed. I'm sure if I sat down and explain. No. That single word stopped the god right in his tracks. He could admit to himself that he took a little too much pleasure in watching the happiness drop from Poseidon's face. Watching the curve of the man's lips shift into a hard, straight line shouldn't have made him that happy. Yet, it did. I don't care what crap you gods are trying to do. I don't want any part in it. A part of him urged him to take into account just where exactly he was. He stood, assumingly, beneath several thousand feet of water, surrounded by a god and his lackeys. The same part urged him to play along, to just give the god what he wanted. That part was being promptly ignored. You can take your plans and shove them up your ass. Okay, that may have been a bit far. He realized that as the words were leaving his mouth, but for the life of him, he couldn't find the willpower to stop talking. By the time he finished speaking, he stood with a stupid grin on his face while Poseidon. You are just as stupid as my brother. The god was not happy. Not one bit. The sour expression on his face was a good tip-off to this, but the harsh tone the man had taken up really tipped Naruto off to the god's mood. When presented with the chance to change the order of the world, you refuse like a child. Naruto became aware of the height difference between himself and the god while the man rose from his throne. It was hard not to when he was eye level with the man's crotch. He craned his neck upward to keep his eye locked with the anger-filled, golden ones of the Earthshaker. "There's no grief in smiting you." As the words left the god's mouth, the blonde raised himself onto the balls of his feet. He could feel the violent swirl of water coming from behind him, reminding him that he was as deep as he could be in the god's territory. Any chance of him escaping would be gone if he didn't give it his all. Why do I keep getting stuck in these situations? I'm sure Hades' scythe would look splendid in my hands. Without any warning, an explosion of water slammed into the blonde's back, pushing him forward toward the god. The god didn't stand by idle, drawing his golden trident into view. The golden tips of the weapon looked deadly in the cerulean-tinted room. Naruto had no doubts that a single thrust by the god would skewer him alive. He had no plans on letting that happen. The act of moving was difficult with the oppressing water around him, but he didn't need to move to wield his best weapon. As he surged toward Poseidon, one of his truth-seeking balls flashed toward the god. The ball left behind a pocketed streak of burning air as it evaporated its way through the water toward the sea god. The orb slammed into the golden chest plate covering the god's gold, beating heart. Unlike many times before, that heart remained beating. The armor held true against the impact of the orb, sending the god stumbling while forcing the sphere to rebound off of its golden surface. That crippled genius has done it again. Poseidon roared while recovering his balance. A grin stretched across his lips before he attempted to beat his fist against the armor. The grin disappeared off of his face when his own fist broke through the gold. That useless crip. The god's words turned into an unintelligible huff of air when the bottom of Naruto's foot broke through the armor and slammed into his chest. The man was lifted off of his feet before a golden arm forced his back against the ground. "Boy, you are powerless." Despite the water slowing his movement, the next fist that slammed into the god's mouth silenced him. It was hard to talk with a mouth full of blood. Though, just because he couldn't talk didn't mean the god didn't attack. Poseidon proved that point when another surge of water threw the blonde across the room. "This is my domain, Naruto. Any moves you think you're making are only possible because I allow it." To the blonde, the god's words came off as a bit muted with the line of blood dribbling from his mouth and the eroding hole in his armor. Though, that didn't stop him from realizing the specks of truth littering the god's words. He was in the man's territory, a territory that his opponent could control with a whim. "I don't want to deal with this right now." It was moments like these that he really did not want to be a god. He wanted to be a regular guy with a guardian angel that could swoop in and rescue him from this situation. "I doubt Michael would ever give you a guardian angel." The truth stung, especially when it came out of the snarky mouth of his resident fox. He would have sent back a comment of his own, nowhere near as snarky, if it weren't for the giant surging toward him. "Give me." Just like the god would be moments later, the rest of his sentence was swallowed up by a floor-rattling shriek. Poseidon turned his head at the sound of the shriek, just barely managing to catch a glimpse of a set of ethereal purple-colored teeth before they tore into his body. To say the god's death was horrific would be an understatement to the blonde. One moment the man had been surging toward him with intent to skewer him, and in the next moment, the left side of the man's body was trapped between in the jaw of a massive dragon. It wasn't very hard for Naruto to identify the dragon as Lilith. Despite how hectic his life had grown, it still hadn't gotten to the point where he encountered more than a handful of dragons. The sight of the girl sitting with a scowl in the construct's head only affirmed his train of thought. He managed to catch only a small glimpse of Lilith's scowl before the dragon construct tore its head away. Unfortunately for Poseidon, who had the misfortune of being stuck in the dragon's jaw at that moment, the action freed him of his left arm, leg and a good chunk of flesh. Golden blood spilled onto the stone floor while the god collapsed onto the ground in a billowing heap of flesh. With gold dripping down its maw, the dragon pointed its head toward the injured Poseidon while opening its mouth wide. So intense was his pain that the god didn't even notice Lilith's descending form before the remainder of his body was firmly in the dragon's mouth. Due to the translucent quality of the dragon's skin, Naruto had a front row seat of watching Lilith swallow the god whole as one could be with half of their body gone with ease. In the belly of the beasts, the god's suffering seemed to reach an apex if his intense writhing was anything to go by. Naruto watched through the dragon's body while pieces of Poseidon's body disintegrated from view. Before long any trace of the god was gone, erased by the toxic that was Lilith's energy. "Father," he couldn't help but cringe at that word. It did not sound right coming out of the dragon's mouth. While Lilith's usual voice had grown on him, the gruff and distorted voice she gained in her dragon form had not done the same. "Are you okay?" If anyone had been remaining in the room, he mused, They would have found the sight of a towering dragon calling him its father and questioning his safety completely ridiculous. They would have been right too. He knew any simple, normal person would be justified in thinking just that. And he knew that because of the fact that the thing that bothered him most about his current situation was the girl's voice, he was nowhere near nor normal. When have you ever been? Never. That was the damning answer. From the first breath he took, things had never been normal. He would have laughed at the past version of him who thought he could lead a simple if it wasn't so fresh in his mind. It was nice to pretend for a bit. It was. But he had grown to realize that the time for pretending was far gone. He was already in a complicated situation and he had no doubts that Poseidon's death would bring him more frustration in the future. I'm fine. His reply to Lilith came accompanied with a grin. Complications were bound to come, but when had they not? He wouldn't let it get him done. Not now and never again. Let's go finish our vacation. Chapter 39. You just had to do it again, didn't you? Wasn't my fault. Before either could respond, a roar of applause from the opposite side of the room drowned the air around them. Both entities looked over toward the sound. The sight of a large crowd held their attention for a few moments before they looked away. My office is filled with angry sea people. Do you know how bad they smell when they're not in the water? A small chuckle escaped past his lips at the man's words. A sip from his glass managed to silence any more laughter. The orange, fizzy liquid bubbled and popped in his throat with fervor, pushing him to drink more. You've toppled 2 Olympians. The Greeks are demanding answers. Can you at least slow down a bit? Maybe aim for a minor god next time. And I told you, it wasn't me this time. Oh, he was glad it was not him this time. For once, his luck was playing in his favor. He found it sort of ironic that it came to fruition in Las Vegas of all places. He certainly could have used it a bit earlier. Another sip from his drink drive that thought out of his head. At this point, he would take what he could get. Luck was luck and beggars could not be choosers. I don't care what you say. The fact of the matter is that Poseidon's people saw you fighting him, then he's dead. Gone. Lilith ate him. A part of him felt bad for the jackal-headed god sitting next to him. The exasperated look on Anubis' face spoke volumes of the crap the god had been going through because of him. That part of him was silenced with another mouthful of his fizzy drink. Look. Anubis ran a hand through the bush of braids that sat at the back of his head. Can you just slow it down? Maybe switch up your target group. The Hindus have millions. I can't promise anything. Zeus apparently has it out for me. Watching the god slam his against the bar shouldn't have been amusing enough to make him laugh, yet it did. Maybe it was the image of a dog banging his head in exasperation, or maybe his empathetic abilities had been worn down by his own experiences. Either way, he was laughing on the inside. I give up. There's no point in fighting it. Go ahead and commit deicide. Who cares? The god's groan ranged out beneath the cover of his arms. Naruto reached over and gave the god a comforting pat on the back. He may have been inwardly laughing, but that didn't mean he couldn't feel the man's pain. He could relate to the crushing futility of trying to change a situation. He could relate all too well. Boy, Vegas is the place to be. If the god wasn't in public, Naruto was sure he would be screaming in frustration based off of the dread that populated his face. With a sense of foreboding, Anubis raised his head up and turned it toward the voice. Without Golden Boy Hades, luck is finally heading my way. Out of the crowd came strutting Osiris. The full suit the blonde had seen him in was abandoned. In its place, a Hawaiian shirt and a pair of khakis covered the man's mummified skin. That scythe-wielding bastard ain't holding me back anymore. Egypt is gettin' her gold back. Another sigh from Anubis drew Naruto's attention back over to the jackal. If looks could kill, he was sure that both Anubis and Osiris would be dead, as the jackal's gaze was equal parts embarrassed and resentful. Anubis, it's going to be a tight ride home for ya. If the mummy dressed in vacation clothing wasn't ridiculous enough, the fact that the man had a literal armful of casino chips clutched to his chest was enough to make even Naruto question the situation. The mad grin that sat across the god's green lips only seemed to tease the absurdity of the scene. Dad, we didn't come here to gamble. Boy, I didn't help give birth to my brother to have him assassinate me and cut my penis off. Life is full of the unexpected. In an odd sort of way, Naruto found himself relating the interaction between father and Sony with his own interactions with Jiraiya. Osiris' crude yet sagacious words reeked over the toad sage. And the absolute disinterest and loathing that sat in Anubis' eyes reminded him of his own youthful self. Oh, How he pitted the jackal god. Will make I. And, you. Osiris cut off his son as he rounded on Naruto. The blonde leaned backward to avoid the slight spill of the man's ebony chips while meeting the dead eyes of the Egyptian god. You got the scythe and the trident in your possession right now. You're going for the crown next. I'm not going for it, but it's probably going to come to me. And, I don't have any trident. That belongs to Lilith. The god released a laugh before settling into the seat next to him. With a loud heave, he allowed his chips to spill onto the bar in front of him while he leaned back into his seat. I had you pinned wrong, boy. The god gave a long stretch of his limbs before settling his arms on his small mountain of chips. I thought you were a troublemaker. Now, I see you're just an unfortunate son of a bitch who is surrounded by trouble. That about summed it up for Naruto as he downed the last bit of his drink. An unfortunate soul surrounded by trouble. The thought brought a grin to his face as he rose up from his seat. I have to get back to my room before Lilith stabs someone with that thing. He offered a wave of his shoulder despite how useless it was. He could already hear the two gods of death arguing. Their words managed to reach him over the bustling casino and its ambient noise. A smile graced his face while happy memories of his time with Jiraiya danced through his mind. Dad, did you use my money to gamble again? Your money. Boy, continue acting selfishly like that and you'll be the next one chopped up. Yup. All happy memories. How dare you, teenagers. Couldn't live without them. At least, that's what he told himself when he decided to take this young, angry brat under his wing. You put my name on this? My actual name? What is wrong with you? Okay. Maybe putting the boy humiliating defeat in print and allowing the full supernatural world to have access to it for a simple $5 plus shipping was a little harsh on his party. Maybe he should have asked Valley first. Maybe he overstepped a bit. Can you actually talk instead of sitting there looking like an idiot? His inner monologue came to a crashing end with the devil's words, and along came a focus on the outside pen that he had been balancing on his nose for a record-setting 4 minutes came clattering down onto his desk as he turned his chair to face the devil. His outside focus dissipated almost immediately at the sight of the devil prince dressed in a sugar-dusted, orange apron. It was only under the strength of his own will and the terrifying anger that radiated from his charge that he managed to stifle the giggles that wanted so desperately to erupt from his mouth. My bad. My mind got lost in the clouds. Admittedly, that response wasn't much better than him outright laughing in the devil's face, but it served its purpose in not getting him punched in the face, if only by the slimmest of margins. Explain this trash to me. He didn't have to look down to know what Valley had just slammed on his desk. The devil's response was all he needed to know. Well. He leaned back into his plush and leather seat, recently bought under the profits of his new hit seller while picking up his pen. Some of the faction's leaders and I decided that a great first step of solidarity would be to work on a collaborative project. And my life was the first choice. Not exactly your life. Just a strong dramatization of it all. Oh boy. That was not the right thing to say. His butt left his ultra-comfortable seat as he was forced to duck beneath his desk. Vala's fist tore through the air above him, sending his chair flying across the room and scaring the dickens out of him. Everything but my name. Now my name is attached to this garbage. He took a risky peek from his safe place. Burning hazel eyes peered back at him, making him want to do nothing but crawl back beneath his desk. Valley was scary when he was angry, but so was he. He wouldn't be bullied by the piss-filled brat. He worked hard on those illustrations and he would not allow them to be written off as garbage. They were art, damn it. My drawings are not garbage. I slaved away at my computer to get your every little detail just right. My art is perfect. Sometime during his little rant, he had risen from his hiding spot and now stood over the devil. He had on his best mean face, the most intimidating visage he could muster up. Whole armies of devil and angels had been forced into retreat from a mere glimpse of this look. This look had helped end the faction wars. I look like an overweight infant in this mess. Your art is nowhere near perfect. I don't know who would even publish this crap. And, stop making that face. It looks like you're constipated. Apparently, the look wasn't good enough to defeat a teenage devil. He allowed his ass to reunite with the ground as defeat rolled through him. Why did he have to adopt such a mean son? For the record, heaven itself published my work. That's who would publish this crap. He had to slip in that piece of information, if not for himself then for the pride of his work. His work was heaven approved after all. Michael approved of this crap. Is he a part of this? What the hell is wrong with you people? A lot, Valley. A lot. Much more than you would ever be able to guess. Did you hear? Did you hear what Nah? Yes, Gabriel. I heard. It would have been almost impossible to not hear about the boys' beating of the Olympian. The supernatural world had been set aflame by the news. Naruto Uzumaki, thought to be a mere candy god months before, had now slain 2 of the 3 Greek brothers. A candy god now held domain in the realm of death and the sea. Will you relent now? Will you believe? He had to hold back a groan as she approached his desk with those doe-like eyes full of hope. She had been like this since her visit to the shop owner. Where she had been repetitive before, she was now incessant in her questioning. I still don't know, Gabriel. Oh, how quick those doe eyes could turn sharp. Before the full sentence could even leave his mouth, she was upon him, her hands planted across his desk and her face inches from his own. Why are you being so stubborn, Michael? Do you enjoy this struggle? I do not, sister. But I have not reached the point where I am willing to put my faith in theories. The question I have for you is why you continue to press this issue. After a few moments of staring, he watched the lines of her face soften while she stepped away from his desk. For that, he was grateful. He knew his sister was the most angelic being in existence, but that did not mean she couldn't put up a scary facade. You weren't there, Michael. The wistful tone his sister had taken up told the angel he was in for a ride. A low sigh, inaudible to the yearning angel in front of him, slipped out of his lips as he settled back into his chair. It was only a glimpse, brother. The smallest of instances. Yet, I felt it. The room was filled with it. With him. Michael leaned further back into his chair. His sister's misty eyes danced in front of him, beckoning for a response. Who would have thought that this is where he would find himself? The golden child of God was now as confused and unremarked as the day he was brought to life. A long exhale left through his nose. His father had left him in charge, to carry on his legacy. Was his job over? Had another truly come to shoulder this burden? Had his father come back? I'll meet with him again. As the words left his mouth, a weight lifted off of his shoulders. Maybe it was the bright smile Gabriel flashed him at that moment, or maybe at the prospect of not being nagged anymore. Either way, Michael knew something changed that day. He could only hope that it was for the best. She is a menace with that thing. He found it hard to disagree while looking at the current state of their hotel. It was chaotic to say the least, and Lilith stood at the center of it all, wielding a trident that looked like it was 3 times her height. The young dragon looked proud of herself while she twirled the weapon around herself like a child would twirl a baton. Unfortunately for her surroundings, she was just as clumsy, and the sharp edges of the weapon were not forgiving in the slightest. You should take it away. Him. The inward shock he felt showed on his face as he looked down at Ophis. Why me? You're the father. He always knew the day Ophis gained a sense of humor would be an interesting one. Such a dry personality would lead to a dry sense of humor. He had only wished he wasn't among one of her first victims. Ignoring the small smile tugging away at the dragon's lips, he began his steady march over to Lilith. A laugh sat at the back of his throat as he walked. Would it have been weird for him to admit his trepidation at the moment? Not at the prospect of being stabbed with the trident. He had faced far worse when it came to fighting. No, the prospect of being a father, even if it was only for a second, struck at his heart. The hit landed and made him freeze up in front of the girl. Instead of her stopping him, she stopped when she took notice of his presence. Father, father. That word snapped him out of his trance. He may not have been an actual father, but at this moment, for his own safety, he needed to act like one. I need you to give me the trident. I'll give it back later, but now it's time to put it away. He held out his hand in what he thought was a fatherly manner. At least, in his mind, he seemed fatherly. He didn't have much experience when it came to fathers and the like, but he was trying his best. The blank stare at Lilith showed him made him quickly doubt how fatherly and authoritative he actually came off as. Of course, the dragon's default setting was apathetic, but the nervous blonde wasn't thinking straight at the moment. He was trying his best not to get pierced by that trident. Lilith stared at him. She stared in silence for several long moments. The moments dragged on to the point where he began to sweat. The feeling only grew worse when the young dragon decided to turn her attention away from him and look at the trident. The way her eyes ran over the weapon's golden surface was a bit more than worrying. The burning in his stomach seemed to agree with him. Okay, father. And just like that, the burning in his stomach was doused by a wave of shock. He nearly jumped back when the dragon held the trident up to his face. He had to look back at the dragon's face to confirm that he was seeing straight. When he was met with her patent blank stare, he decided that he had enough with questioning and took the weapon out of her hand. "Don't worry. I'll give it back later." A nod. His face nearly split apart at the sight of that nod. A part of him realized that a large part of his happiness came from the knowledge that things could have gone so much worse. Though, his recent habitat on looking on the brighter side of things made him ignore that part as he sealed away Poseidon's, now technically Lilith's, trident. "For now, let's try and relax without swinging around giant we." His words died in his mouth when a door knock echoed through the room. He turned his head toward the door to see Ophis already standing with her hand on its knob. He had never considered himself paranoid, but in that singular moment where Ophis was pulling the door open, a chaotic swarm of thoughts and worries bombarded him. As relaxed as he tried to be, he couldn't ignore the fact that he undoubtedly had a whole faction of gods on his ass after killing 2 of their leaders. So, he felt no shame in donning his sage cloak at that instant. "I bought some stuff." Luckily for him, HS paranoia would be for naught. Instead of a god or some hitman, Kaneko was the one standing behind the door. On either of her arms sat a ludicrous amount of clothing. He allowed his cloak to die away while he watched the Nekashu step into the room and shot Ophis a grateful nod before dropping her bags to the ground. "There are some snack." There was no hesitation in him this time when the sound of knocking reached his ears. He was across the room in a second, his hand wrapped around Ophis' wrist, stopping her from opening the door. He only needed a single look to silence any questioning from her before he devoted his full attention to the closed door. The flames of his sage cloak licked away at his vision as he moved his eye towards the door's peephole. He pressed his eye against the tiny window and squinted hard to see who was on the opposite side. His heart nearly leaped out of his chest when he saw who it was. "Who is it?" "It is I, Artemis." He didn't bother turning away to see Kaneko's reaction. He wasn't quite sure if he had told the girl about his immortal stalker, but he couldn't afford to take his eye off of the goddess. After what had gone down between him and Poseidon, there was no way he was trusting her to be anything but hostile. "Do you need me to kill her, father?" If it weren't for his past interactions with the girl, Naruto was sure he would have to turn away from the door out of pure shock at her words. Instead, he held strong and shook his head in reply while his hand crept toward the knob of the door. "I'm going to handle it." Oh, he was going to handle it. And by handling it, he meant flashing her away as far as he could and hoping she wouldn't manage to find her way back. "Just to prefix this, I have no plans on harming you." Those words froze him in place. A curse leaped from his mouth as his hand rested on the doorknob. "I'm not dealing with this crap on my vacation." From Artemis' perspective, she went from staring at a wooden door to staring at the human equivalent of the sun in the matter of a moment. Before she could even think to reach for her weapon, her uncle's trident sat inches from her face. "Tell me what you want." Her eyes traveled from the tip of the trident up its shaft and eventually landed on the now orange eyes of her blonde target. A smile, one strained from the power radiating from Naruto and the awkwardness of the situation, popped on her face while she locked eyes with the boy. "I came to deliver an offer." The narrowing of his eyes nearly made her hands reached for her now. But a part of her, the part that remembered watching the god in front of her battle, knew it was for naught. The speed at which he could manipulate those orbs of his outpaced anything she could produce. She would be dead before she could even notch an arrow. "I honestly don't want to." It's from Zeus." She knew she was taking a risk saying that name considering the bad reputation it carried, one she had helped build. The narrowed look she received in return told her how close she was towing her personal line of safety. Though, the fact that the blonde had chosen not to skewer her with her uncle's weapon prompted her to continue. "He would like to sit down and talk with you. Today. He is waiting in the lobby right now. Feel free to come prepared." With her piece said, she dared a step backward. When Naruto didn't decide to attack her, a sigh broke past her lips before she turned her back and began walking. She managed to make it several steps in her calm pace before she broke out in a sprint, disappearing around a corner and out of Naruto's sight a few moments later. "I think you may need to give Lilith her trident back." Naruto's attention was brought away from the hallway by the sound of his girlfriend's voice. His eyes cut over to her form leaning against the doorway. "I have no use for it. It was fun to play with, but it would only slow me when serving my father." "You can have it, Aunt Kaneko." Both Kaneko and Naruto turned back toward the dragon after she spoke. Did they hear her correctly? It took a shared look between them both to confirm that the words that came out of Lilith's mouth actually came out of her mouth. Ah! The sound slipped out of his mouth while the sage's chakra faded from his body. His eyes cut between Kaneko and Lilith for a few moments before landing on the golden weapon in his hand. His hesitation lasted for several more moments before a shrug announced his decision to the world. Sure. I think that's a good idea. He held the trident out toward the girl and within a second it was out of his hands. He blinked at the sudden change before he lowered his gaze down to the girl. You feel any different? He had to ask the question. Holding the weapon, he hadn't felt any noticeable changes. Lilith seemed to feel the same way. From the nonchalant look on Kaneko's face, the same seemed to go for her. The shrug she offered him as she twirled around the weapon. I feel more wet. Her words, along with the small smile tugging at her lips, dragged a laugh out of him. Leave it up to her to make him laugh despite the fact that a god, one that he had killed 2 of its brothers, sat waiting for him in the lobby of their hotel. I also felt a bit of dampness while holding the weapon. Lilith's words sucked the amusement right out of him. It seemed to do the exact opposite for Kaneko. The small grin on her face erupted into a peal of laughter. Even Ophis seemed amused by her daughter's words. The slight hum of Kurama's chuckling within the recesses of his mind tipped him off that even his partner was laughing it up at him. I rather talk to Zeus than stay up here. His words went ignored in the room full of laughter, excluding Lilith, of course. As soon as the young girl saw her father step out of the room, she bolted after him. It was only after he had turned on his heel and was halfway down the hallway that the duo of Nekasha and Dragon noticed his disappearance. With a quick jog, the 2 girls caught up to their favorite blonde. You can't fight Zeus without us. He took a moment to look down at the girls by his side. One dragon god, her clone daughter and one devil Nekasha that now held the trident of a Greek god in her hands. The sight of the odd group brought a chuckle out of the blonde as he stepped into an elevator. Yeah, together we'll be alright. The elevator ride down to the lobby had to be one of the oddest trips Naruto had ever taken despite its length. Luckily for him, his group were the only ones to hop in. He had no doubt that the god's presence below played a part in that. That left him alone in a mechanized box with his 3 companions while subpar music played from a broken speaker. Definitely one of his more odd elevator rides. The door to the machine sprung open, freeing the group of 4. He was the first to step out, followed by his girlfriend and their 2 dragon companions. The emptiness of the lobby floor was their first warning that something was definitely off. Not even the greeter was present in the building. No, the only thing that stood in the room was his group, Naruto Uzumaki, and the glimmering man who had burst through the hotel doors. His presence was undeniable, his loud shouting and glowing body made sure of that. Everything from the man's blonde hair to his teeth and even down to the bronze skin that made up his toes glowed. The white toga that covered most of his body offered some reprieve from his shine. You're the man I wanted to speak with. The man didn't stop at the lobby door. With several long strides, he began making his way over toward the group. He managed to make it halfway across the lobby before stopping. Not on his own accord, of course, but because of the 2 dragons and the trident-wielding Nekasha that met his advance. Whoa! The god's hands shot up at the sign of their assault. Luckily for him, that actually managed to stop them in their tracks. Whether it was out of willingness or pure confusion, he didn't know, but the man wasn't going to question not being attacked. I meant no harm. Really? I just want to talk to Naruto. You will not get close to my father. The man's eyes drifted over to Lilith for a brief moment. That moment was all he needed to know that taking any more steps would not be best for his health. So, instead, he turned his attention away from the dragon and toward the blonde standing at the other side of the room. He sucked in a deep breath before shouting. Hey, kid! How would you like to rule Olympus? Chapter 40. Where had it all gone wrong? What wrong turn had he taken in life that landed him at a table in the middle of Los Angeles, sitting across from the leader of the Greek pantheon while his own personal group of dragons and devils sat by his side? How bad had he rolled on the dice that determined his luck in life? Look, I'm sorry for all the confusion and misconceptions, man. The baritone voice forced his focus back into the reality of the moment. Zeus, in all of his mighty glory, sat at the opposite end of the table, his fingers covered in barbecue sauce while the bones of several chicken wings sat on neatly on a porcelain plate. I get a pretty bad rep nowadays. Lesson to you kids, your past mistakes and infidelities will follow you for the rest of your life, even if that life goes on for thousands of years. The man let out a laugh at his own words, unknowingly sending bits of the sauce spilling from his mouth onto his pristine toga. Before the sauce could stain, it was lifted from the white sheets as if by magic, leaving them as pure as they had been moments before. Now, I'm putting that all behind me. I'm moving forward with life. And to move forward, I need to get rid of some things from my past. The man unceremoniously dropped the wing he was holding before he began to dig into his robe. The group of 4 watched him blindly search through his robes for a few moments before a pleased look announced that he had found his treasure. Here we go. With a loud bang, the object came clattering onto the table. Every single eye at the table gravitated toward the object. It was hard for them not to. The thing was large, brassy, shining and immaculate. Not to mention that it was covered from top to bottom with jewels. What was that? From a glance the identity of the object was pretty clear despite his questioning. The thing was a crown, its shining surface and the jewels embedded in it made that very clear to them all. The sinking feeling in his stomach was only beginning to confirm the words that would undoubtedly come out of the god's mouth. It's the crown of Olympus. Those were the words. Naruto sunk down in his seat with a sigh, his plate of fries untouched. By his side Lilith and Ophis didn't seem the least bothered by the man's words while they collectively munched on a plate of nachos. Kaneko seemed to be the only one who felt his misfortune as she scooted closer to his left. Well, to be fair, it's just a crown. The god scooped the object back up into his hands then placed it on his head. There's nothing special about it. You don't put it on and become the chief god or anything like that. Another laugh escaped the god's mouth as he set the crown back down and with it, Naruto's confusion began to grow. The situation itself was extremely baffling and the god's flippant attitude wasn't helping a bit when it came to him coping. Kaneko, on the other hand, seemed perfectly fine with the situation. She made that very clear to everyone at the table when she reached across it and grabbed the crown off the table. With a level of frivolous that shouldn't be possible when holding the crown to the pantheon, the girl plopped the crown on her head. The crown looks good on ya. Zeus barked out the words along with a laugh. The sight of his girlfriend wearing the crown left Naruto, once again, speechless. His eyes met with hers for a brief instant before a tug at his arm made him look away. I think it looks nice. Lilith's words and earnest gaze made him nearly fall out of his chair. Yet, he managed to keep himself upright. I don't like it. It messes with my ears. And, just like that, his sense of togetherness came crashing down. Because as those words were leaving her mouth, Kaneko decided to place the crown on top of his head. And, unlike with her, a reaction took place. The crown really likes you. The god had to say his statement while shielding his eyes because of the bright light the crown flashed from atop of Naruto's head. Where the thing had looked like a well-made knockoff when it was on the table, it now looked like a star on the blonde's head. Kaneko, Lilith and Ophis were even forced to look away from him as the intensity of the crown filled the air. The only one who wasn't affected by the light was the dismayed Uzumaki. No, no, no. I'm not doing this again. In a mad scramble, he reached up to his head, snatched the crown off of his golden locks and threw it towards Zeus. He refused to deal with the glowing crown or the Greeks anymore. He had had enough. The futility of that refusal became clear to him when the crown did a sharp U-turn in midair back toward him. He ducked his head in a dodge attempt, an attempt that was met with failure when the crown made a hard stop over the top of his head before falling onto his head. It really, really likes you. The god mumbled to himself while watching the blonde continuously rip the crown off his head and throw it only for it to come flying back to its original position. The scene managed to keep him entertained for a solid minute before he decided it was time to make his exit. With the crown ditched, and all of his responsibility with it, it was now time to start his well-deserved millennium-long vacation. While stealth wasn't exactly his forte, he felt that he did a good job getting up from his seat and sneaking toward the restaurant's exit without being noticed. He was proven wrong when a golden arm wrapped around his midsection before dragging him back to the table, bringing him face to face with a sage-cloaked and highly irritated Naruto. You're not leaving without this thing. He growled in the gods before reaching up and attempting to rip the damn thing off of his head. Attempted was the optimal word because this attempt ended in failure. The crown stayed put on his head no matter how hard he tried to pull it off. The irritation on his face morphed into utter dread as his incessant tugging won him no progress. I like you, Naruto. His attention torn from the crown and dragged to the god he still held in his chakra arm. The man was flashing him an infuriating smile despite the construct of energy wrapped around his body. I respect two things, power and beautiful women. You seem to have a good grasp on both. so I'll hand you a bit of advice. Without warning, Zeus exploded into a flash of lightning strong enough to send the blonde reeling backward. The god reappeared near the door, his toga untouched and his smile still in place. Some bald guy told me this a while back. You can't fight this stuff, so you might as well embrace it. It took me a couple of millenniums to figure out one loophole out of this crap. The god offered his agitated counterpart a hearty salute before disappearing in a crack of thunder, leaving Naruto alone with his group and his new crown. That bastard! He screeched. The trio of dragon and devil watched as the blonde rolled across the ground, his hands glued to the golden crown in an attempt to tear it off his head. The spectacle continued for a whole minute before Lilith approached the boy. Father. The dragon's words went ignored while the blonde focused on his crown. A frown marred the girl's face as she watched her parent figure freak out. The frown turned into an outright scowl after several moments before the girl reached down and snatched the ornament off his head. Please calm yourself, father. It was hard not to feel like an idiot when a girl, who was technically less than a year old, was standing over him with the object of his frustration held in her hands as if he hadn't been freaking about it only moments before. He felt a bit humiliated, admittedly, but at this point in his life humiliation was a norm. So, he sucked up the last broken bits of his pride and climbed back up to his feet. With his attention not on the leech-like crown on top of his head, he took the chance to observe the object. Honestly, in Lilith's hands, it looked harmless, even fake. It had a cheap plastic look to it that made it seem like something you would get from a convenience store rather than the crown to a pantheon of gods. I guess I'm stuck with this crow. Before he could get the full word out of his mouth, the crown leapt out of the dragon's hands. The group of four watched as it flew over his head. In an instinct, the blonde had both of his arms covering his scalp in some attempt to stop the thing from landing on his head. He soon found out how useless his efforts were when instead of swooping down onto his head like an Arctic owl onto a bear, the crown stood in place and began to glow. Like a shooting star, it held all of their attention as it vomited out an egregious amount of light. At one point the thing got so bright that the blonde was forced to squint in order to keep his attention on the thing. The dazzling light lasted for several moments before dying away in an instant, revealing the crown's new form. Gone were the expensive jewels and the nearly luminescent golden surface. In its place remained an ebony surface, one dark enough to disguise itself in the dark of the night. The pointed tips of the crown were now rounded into a trio of tight spirals that were strung together by an even darker string. The object remained in the air for several moments before descending down toward Naruto. This time he didn't bother trying to dodge the object, allowing it to approach his neck without hesitation. The necklace attached itself around his collar, the string melding with his skin as if it was water. Its presence would have been unnoticeable to him if he wasn't looking at the three spirals hanging beneath his Adam's apple. That looks much more appealing than that gaudy crown. Ophis was right. He didn't want to admit that she was because that meant admitting that he found the stupid thing appealing in any way, but he knew that her words were true. The spirals reminded him of the magmata that surrounded his neck during his stints in Sage mode. The nearly naked feeling of the accessory didn't help in his mind either. I think our vacation is over. The moment he had took a step on that beach his vacation had been over. He could try as much as he could but there was no getting away from this wreck of a life. I call sitting next to father on the ride home. Their trip home, to the blonde's joy, had been completely lackluster. He had grown numb to the odd looks he received when traveling with his odd gang of creatures, so the only thing he had to worry about was a god meddling in his business. Nothing of the sort happened, leaving him as a happy shinobi. Hold my bag while I grab my keys. Without a second thought, his bulky bags containing his clothes for the week was lifted from his arms by Ophis, an act that was a far cry from how she would have treated him weeks prior. He still sometimes found it hard to believe the dragon's attitude adjustment but couldn't find it within himself to question it much. After all, it made his hectic life just a little bit more manageable. What else could he even ask for? With his hands now free, he dug into his pants pockets and pulled out the metal key to his room. He slid the key into the lock and turned, unlocking the door and pushing it open. He made it a whole 2 steps into the building before he took notice of something peculiar. Naruto! You're home, finally. Getting greeted by Kuroka wasn't odd by any stretch of his imagination. The woman lived in his living room, which made it pretty difficult for him to avoid her. No, it was the way she greeted him that captured his attention. She was tense, her normal smile strained to a point that looked uncomfortable on her face. Her back was straightened to a near-perfect line, a far cry from how he usually found her reclined on his couch. Her folded hands were the last straw on the pile of hints that something was not right. Welcome back from your vacation, Naruto. It didn't take long to find the source of Kuroka's discomfort. The man who had invaded his house sat directly across from the distressed devil. Hello, Michael. The angel gave him a nod before rising up from his love seat. The blonde's eyes followed him as the leader of heaven walked around the living room's couch toward him. I hope you don't mind me coming into your house unannounced. That innocent little smile on the seraph's face may have worked on other people, but Naruto knew better. The angel knew he would be annoyed by someone breaking into his house, ally or not. What do you want? At that moment, he was filled with regret. With an angel standing in front of him, the decision to cut his vacation short didn't seem like such a good one anymore. Though, it seems that no matter where he went, the trouble would follow him. I would like for you to come to heaven. Why? A week or two ago, he would have immediately belted out a no and kicked the angel out of his house. Now though, after the fight had beaten the fight out of him, he stood willing enough to at least hear Michael's argument. I would like to test something that is only possible in my domain. His first thought, this sounded like an obvious trap. He had been to heaven once, and that still remained as one of his least pleasant memories in this world. Nothing in him wanted to return to the city atop of the clouds. What do you want to test out? Find a new type of rope that drains my powers? Michael didn't seem the least bothered by the obvious mistrust in his voice. The angel took it in stride, nodding and laughing at his comment while holding his hands up in a pacifying manner. I promise it's nothing like that. We are allies, after all. He was right. They were allies. After that debacle of a treaty signing that he had been dragged into, there was no denying that he was a part of the angel-devil fallen trifecta. Some even labeled him as the cornerstone of the entire thing. Why don't you just tell me what you want then? No needs for secrets between allies, right? The words came out a lot more childish and biting than he would have liked, but he couldn't help himself. This guy didn't know what type of chaos he had been thrown into during the last couple of days. He had left his home with intentions on relaxing and returned with the relics of 2 Olympians, bringing his current collection to an unnecessarily high of 3. Well. The angel swept his eyes over toward Ophis and Lilith, a clear sign of how he felt about the duo. The gesture sent Naruto's eyes rolling, though he could understand the angel's hesitation. To him, Lilith and even Ophis were harmless. He regularly forgot about the fact that the duo held enough power to put him on the ropes and destroy the world. Any rational person would be hesitant to give the set of dragons any more power than they already had. Are you afraid of 2 little girls? Little they may have been, them actually being girls was questionable altogether. The blonde knew how absolutely ridiculous and inflammatory his statement was. He was just hoping that the angel couldn't see the same. I'm afraid of a being who had the potential to destroy the world with its strength. They aren't going to do anything like that. I promise. His statement earned him a queer look from the chaste angel. The look lasted for a moment before the man switched his attention over to Lilith and Ophis. He stared at the duo for a similar duration before cutting his attention back to Naruto. He repeated the process again and again and again, his eyes narrowing with each switch. You've become rather attached to Ophis and her spawn since the last time I've interacted with you. That truth smacked him hard across the face. Harsh and undeniable, it sunk into his skin and assaulted his nerves, forcing him to turn and face the mentioned dragon. He was met with 2 faces, one void of emotion and the other seemingly waiting on his next words. I don't see what's the point of you bringing that up. The blonde turned back to the angel only to be met with an accusatory stare. The look was as confusing as it was off-putting, it nearly managing to send the blonde reeling backward. No reason. And, just like that, the look disappeared from the angel's face. You're right. I have nothing to fear with you restraining the duo. If he hadn't already been living in a state of perpetual confusion prior to this interaction, Michael's behavior may have left him in a bit of a loop. I wish to text the extent of your powers using a system located in heaven. Its existence is hidden from all excluding a select few individuals. With it, we would have an accurate measure of the full extent of your abilities and be able to accurately call upon you when needed. The angel's matter-of-fact tone put a smile on Naruto's face. Honesty. It was something he rarely got nowadays. He may have had to force it out a little bit, but getting it, in the end, was good enough for him. You should have just said that to begin with. He exclaimed with a bright smile on his face. That actually sounds interesting. Wonderful. The angel flashed his own smile before snapping his fingers. In a flash of blinding light, Naruto and his group, including Kuroka, found themselves standing somewhere very different from the blonde's living room. For the shinobi, the two dragons and Kaneko, who were only a couple hours separated from encountering two Greek gods, the sudden transition into the well-lit garden area was nothing to their steeled nerves. Kuroka, however, was somewhat virgin to the eccentric abnormalities that followed her housemate. She only managed to catch a glimpse of his adventures while manning his store in his steed. That was why the sight that greeted her was so shocking. The couch-laden room she had uncomfortably sat in with one of heaven's angels had been replaced by an expansive garden, one filled with enough vegetation to feed an army. White marble lined the stone walkway that split the garden in two, leading to a singular domed building that was surrounded by a golden gate. Above her sat a blue sky, uncovered and untarnished by a single cloud. So beautiful. The devil muttered to herself before taking notice that everyone in the group had started to move on without her. In a quick dash, she managed to reconnect with the party and catch on to Michael's words. "We're in the 7th level of heaven, the one you managed to stumble upon during your first visit here." The sarcastic tone layering Michael's words and the bashful look on Naruto's face told Kuroka all she needed to know about the situation. The shinobi's increasingly wild reputation concerning the supernatural leaders only made things more clear for her. "Sorry about that." Naruto's apology was met with a small smile and silence, causing his already uneasy smile to waver in strength. Michael's smile did the opposite, growing where its counterpart shrunk. The small exchange lasted for a few moments before the two men broke eye contact. Behind these gates lay something that very few beings have seen in the history of the world. It is one of heaven's most guarded secrets, so much so that it is completely separate from the other levels of heaven. The angel stopped in front of the golden gate, prompting the rest of the group to follow suit. Instead of procuring a key, the man instead raised his hand up to the barrier. He pressed his palm against the gate's keyhole. The area beneath his hand lit up when his hand touched the gate before a loud click rang through the guard. Within a moment of the second, the gate slowly drifted open, flooding the group with a rush air. "The gate is just for show." The angel's backhanded comment was lost on the group. Their attention was stolen from the man by the awe emitting from the building. It was an unexplainable sensation, one Michael was even captured by. It was only because of his prior experience that he had the presence of mind to turn and observe the awe-filled faces of Naruto's group. "I had a very similar reaction when father first brought me here. It is indescribable, isn't it?" He didn't wait for a response, instead opting to work toward the building. Unlike the gate, the doors to the structure needed no prompting from the angel, opening on their own as the angel approached. The group quickly followed the angel through the door, their eyes immediately soaking in all the building had to offer. To Naruto, the building's interior was Spartan, even when comparing it to some of the standards set by shinobi he knew. The place was obviously not for living in, as there wasn't a single sort of amenity to be seen. The curved walls were white and barren. The only thing that decorated them was a sprinkle of light emitting from the center of the room. What stood as the only attraction in the room wasn't remarkable by any measure. A white pedestal brought it to about waist level for the angel and shinobi. Just like the surrounding walls, its curved surface were white and barren. A thin light, one Naruto had serious doubts could fill the entire room like it did, sat in the mouth of the object. Two leads, both leather-bound and worn, dangled from the object. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" A shadow fell over the group before their mind could catch up with their thoughts. Instinctually, their collective attention turned upward. The will to fight flooded nearly every one of them as their minds screamed ambush until they laid eyes on the owner of the voice. "I thought we agreed that you wouldn't be here during the process." To the group, it was very clear that Michael was annoyed with his sister. Even as the angelic woman floated down from the ceiling, her flight aided by the use of her wings, the seraph was sending her a glare. The look didn't seem to ruffle any of her feathers if the smile on her face was anything to go by. Instead, she smiled, beaming her naturally white teeth at the group of devils, dragons, and ninja. "I couldn't wait, Michael. I couldn't possibly wait for this." The words left her mouth as her feet met with the ground. The golden wings supporting her during her descent shimmered for a brief moment before disappearing from view. This moment could renew us. It could truly bring the world together just like he always was. Her talking came to an abrupt end when she sucked in a deep breath. With her cheeks puffed outward, the angel held the breath for several moments before slowly letting it loose. Once finished, her previous smile returned to her face as she turned to Michael. "I'm sorry, brother. Please continue." She offered the angel a bow of her head before taking a step backward toward the wall. Michael looked at her for a brief moment, a sigh leaving his mouth during the time, before switching his attention over to Naruto. I apologize for that. We can start now. All you have to do is grab one of the leads. To say he was a bit freaked out would have been a massive understatement for Naruto. He had been, albeit a tiny bit skeptical about Michael's intention all the way up to the point where Gabriel had come swooping down from the ceiling of the building and started rambling about uniting the world. His trepidation must have shown on his face, making Michael grunt before shooting his sister a pointed look. Please ignore my sister. I assure you that nothing is amiss here. To reassure him, Michael reached out and grabbed onto one of the leather leads. For several moments silence dominated the building's interior before the angel released his hold. See? Nothing strange. Just do as I did and we can move on. His eyes cut over to the lead, staying there for a few moments before moving over to Michael. He stared at the angel's face for several moments, attempting to find any sign of deceit. I'll check for you, father. Because of his intense observation of Michael's face, Naruto got a first-hand view of the angel's expression descending into shocked horror at Lilith's words. In an instant, the angel placed himself between the pedestal and the dragon, halting her outstretched hand from touching one of the leads. That being cannot touch the holy system. There's no telling what could happen if the system reads her energy. The angel looked frantic as the words left his mouth. Lilith's neutral face descended into a frown at the angel. Her outstretched hand began to glow an inky purple, prompting both Michael and Gabriel to flare out their wings in defense. Lilith! And, just like that, the girl's arm dropped down to her side, any side of the built of energy gone. She looked back at her father and, seeing the stern look on his face, dropped her head before taking a step away from Michael and the pedestal. I'll grab the thing, Michael. The angel's attention was dragged away from Lilith when Naruto spoke. If anything goes wrong, though, know that I won't be able here to calm her down. With those words, Naruto took a step toward the pedestal. Michael remained standing in front of the object, his own hesitation showing as he looked between the blonde and the dragon. It was only after a muffled cry from Gabriel that the angel decided to move away from the pedestal. With Michael out of the way, Naruto stared down into the small bowl containing the light. From up close, it didn't look any more unique than before. The light from within was bright enough to blind him from seeing any intricacies inside the bowl. Here it goes. A pause preceded his actions before he reached down and took a single rein into each of his hands. There was no hesitation. The reaction was immediate. As the lengths of leather laid in the blonde's weathered hands, the light within the bowl leaped outward, finding refuge in the eyes of the surrounding creatures. Their pupils dilated to a fraction of their previous size moments before their hands came up to shield their faces. The action proved pointless, however, as the group has been collectively blinded, including the two angels. Father, I love you. Please watch over mommy and daddy. A voice, childish and demure in nature, reached him. The light had stolen his vision away, leaving him with a view of nothing but white. The remainder of his senses were still with him, allowing him to hear the melodious call of the child. I hope that she gets better soon. I don't know what I would do without her. Demure faded into desperateness and the childish tone dropped to that a grown man. Even without his sight, Naruto could sense the tired lines on the man's face, the darkened skin that rested beneath his eyes and the residual marks on his cheeks that marked his tears. I needed this. I knew you were listening. Thank you, Lord. The man's face melted into that of a woman, a teen by his estimate. Her black tresses moved along with her bouncing form. Clothed in a pair of striped pajamas, a single piece of paper was captured in her grip as her bouncing carried her through the kitchen. The tile floor did little in absorbing the force of her bounces, making the wooden dining table jump along with her movements. Her breakfast, a half-empty plate that contained a sole sausage link, half of a pancake and a small hill of eggs laid forgotten. The second hand of an analog clock ticked away silently as her squeals resonated through kitchen flooded with an early morning light. Look, God! The light within the kitchen bled black. He was helpless, unable to move, as the darkness overcame his form and, eventually, the entirety of his vision, leaving him blind once more. I don't believe in you. I never have. A soft beeping was the first to reach his ears. The noise was familiar. It pounded away at his memory, each beep a nail that brought the solidified thought closer to the surface of his mind. But as the nostalgic memory was about to burst into the forefront of his consciousness, his sight returned to him, stealing away his attention. I know you can't save me. I know you won't. But, if you exist, if you've been watching me all of my life. A soft moonlight bled through the curtained windows of the room. With his vision restored, Naruto was able to easily tell that they were located in a hospital room. The repetitive beeping came from a heart monitor that sat near a hospital bed. Immaculate white sheets had been tossed to the ground, leaving the bed's owner bare to the room's elements. "Give me this. I don't want to burn. I wasn't the best, but I don't deserve hell. Isn't this bad enough? You can't kill me early on Earth then send me to hell." The man's sunken chest rose and fell with each word. His eyes were closed, yet Naruto saw traces of tears leaking past his eyelids. The liquid sorrow fell from his face and wetted the thin hospital gown that covered his frame. "I hope you're listening. You better be listening. After doing this to me, you damn better be listening." The man's eyes shot up and swept across the room. For a brief moment, his vision fell over Naruto, paralyzing the blonde. Those brown eyes were crack-filled dams of emotion, his tears serving as the torrent of water battering against the interior. "You brought everything to M. It's time for you to make a choice." A voice flooded through the room and drowned out the man's rambling. Naruto did a quick sweep of the area around him but found nothing that could correlate to the new voice. Michael Irvin Cyron. 33 years old. Cause of death will be terminal lung cancer in approximately 2 hours. Who are you? Michael's primary sin was greed. He never sought repentance for his sin, making him ineligible for entrance into any level of heaven. You must banish him to hell. The blonde's shout went ignored as the voice continued one. Booming and stern, the voice lacked emotion as sentenced the man to hell. I'm not going to send a guy I don't know to hell. Michael spent his early 20s stealing money from the people who offered him his first job when he was 14. At the age of 18, he pressured his then-girlfriend into getting an abortion, threatening to denounce her and their relationship if she went through with the pregnancy. The last 5 years of his life have been spent running away from his cancer diagnostic while blaming others for it despite its origins being the aggressive amount of smoking he did during his youth. Silenced. The words had been stolen from his mouth. With each word spoken by the voice, his will to argue was stolen away from him. He felt numb in the presence of the man's past even as the said man continued to angrily ramble in his bed, ignorant to the conversation taking place a few feet away from him. Heaven is not purely for the righteous. Its gates are not locked to those who have sinned. But, it is locked to those who refuse to repent unless faced with the hands of death. Hell is an appropriate place for this man. He spent his mortal life enraptured in greed. His eternal life, the one true life, should be spent in damnation, separated from the grace of the Lord. Shut the hell up. For once, the voice actually showed signs of hearing the blonde, silencing itself on his command. Who the hell are you to sit back and judge this man's life? I am the presence of the Lord. I am the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I am the one true God. A father is supposed to protect their kids. How can you call yourself a father when you're trying to damn your kids to hell? I gave him life. He wasted it, thus he sh. I can see why people don't believe in gods. Once again, Naruto's words cut a hot line through God's words. You're supposed to be all-powerful and all-knowing, yet us simple humans owe you guys something. You know what? You're just a selfish asshole. Michael didn't owe you anything. He may have been an ass, but he lived his life the best way he knew how. And he's asking for forgiveness now and you want to send him to hell? You're no god. You're no better than a bratty little kid. In the moments after his tirade, the only thing that could be heard was his heavy breathing as his chest rose and fell. With no face to aim his anger at, the blonde let it loose in all directions, unrestrained and wild. The silence, a telling sort of silence, accompanied him, serving to only make him more agitated. Naruto Uzumaki. 18 years of age. Don't you fucking do that. Cause of death is unknown. Primary sin is gluttony. Labeled child of destiny and boy of miracles. The voice rattled off, silencing Naruto. Confusion etched its way onto his face as the words hit him. You say this man doesn't deserve hell. You question my will and call me a coward. You question my love for my children, the beings I created in my own image and gifted the gift of life. The voice broke away into a small chuckle, the first sign of actual emotion from the unseen presence. Then, suddenly, the walls surrounding the blonde broke away and with them, Michael. Naruto's last sight of the man was of him with tears streaming down his cheeks, his hospital gown balled up in his clenched fists. Do you think you're worthy of being a god? Do you think you're worthy of judging a man's life by his actions? No. Despite the fact that he found himself floating in a black void, surrounded by nothing for what seemed to be miles, the answer flew out of his mouth immediately. The experiences he had been dragged through in the past few months had solidified his answer long before this voice had asked him. Perfect. With a single word, the world around Naruto exploded into light. His hands came up to shield his eyes as the light encompassed him. Naruto Uzumaki. I am gone from the world. My grace has long since left its plane. The war I foolishly fueled has taken its toll on Earth. But it will survive. You will make it survive. Shock melded into a fierce trepidation as the meaning behind God's words became clear to the blonde. No, 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 no. The protest leaped out of his mouth in a rushed jumble of words. With my will, you will do what even my son has yet to accomplish. The Longinus spear will be the symbol that you are the world's one and true. Don't you say it, God. The world is in your hands, Naruto Uzumaki. With those words, the light surrounded him died away, restoring his vision. He was met with the sight of an aged man with an uncountable amount of wrinkles on his face. Beneath the wrinkles, Naruto could spot the telltale signs of a smile. The face stared back at him for a few moments before it melted, revealing the face of a small female child. The barest hints of her grin were caught by the blonde before the face left him. A dark-skinned male took her place only to be replaced by the face of a tanned woman. Woman turned to male and dark turned to light as the cycle continued, each interval between the faces growing shorter and shorter until he was left staring at an indistinguishable blur of faces. I have faith in you. The world around him descended into black for a brief moment before he found himself standing back in the 7th level of heaven, directly in front of the bowl Michael had led him to. Only now, the light was no longer present within the structure. Father! He heard a squeal come from his left before a weight hit him in the side. He stumbled briefly before catching himself. He looked down at his waist, fully expecting to see Lilith clinging to him only to be stunned when he was met with Gabriel's golden hair splayed across his lower body. I was right, Michael. He's back. Though her voice came out as muffled, he could hear the nearly silent sobs that contorted her voice into a nearly unrecognizable garble. He looked toward Michael for answers only to be met with the teary-eyed gaze from the seraph. Welcome back, Father. Welcome back. Chapter 41. Before we go any further, I feel like I need to clear up some things. Now, I know there's been a lot of words thrown around. Some people think a certain way and others think the otherwise. I'm talking right now to straighten all of that out. My name is Naruto Uzumaki and I am a lot of things. I am, and forever will be, a shinobi from the Hidden Leaf Village. I am the son of the Minato Namikes and Kushina Uzumaki. I am the container of the nine-tailed fox, Kurama. I am a member of Team 7, apprentice to the legendary Toad Sannin, reincarnation of Old Man Sage's son, future Hokage and avid ramen lover. What I am not is a god. I don't care how many people call me one. I don't care how many stupid weapons and symbols get tossed at me. I don't even care about how many people worship me. I am not and will never be a god of anything. This includes candy, ramen, heaven, earth and whatever other stupid thing you want to say I have control over. I'm just a normal guy who got thrown into a crazy situation. Until I say otherwise, I will be just that. I know everyone won't accept this. I know there'll be some people out there who will think of me as their god until the day I die. I can't help that. I can't fix that. All I can do is tell as many of you the truth and hope to whatever actual God that is out there that as many as you as possible will listen. But, deep down in my stomach, I have a feeling no one will. 2 more kids without me. Naruto, I'm hurt. Father, I have siblings now. Your spawn creating skills are expressive, Naruto. Speechless. Confused. Dumbfounded. Frustrated. There were a lot of words you could have used to describe his overall mood. Any of them would have been accurate because, honestly, there was no one way to describe how he felt. He was speechless because no matter how much he wanted to shout his head off, the words wouldn't escape his mouth. They remained trapped beneath an invisible barrier that was at work trying to keep his sanity together. Rejoice! He is back. After all those years, he has returned to us. As gently as his shock-laden mind could manage, his arms came up and pushed the girl away from himself. Ignoring the confused expression on the angel's face, he turned to Ophis, his face an unreadable mask of swirling emotions. Please make a portal back to my house. The dragon's loyalty to him shone bright when she carried out his request without any questioning. With a small amount of gesturing on her part, a portal stood in his path. Naruto offered up Kaneko a pointed look before stepping through the portal. Hey, wait! Don't leave me here, Naya. Seeing her caretaker disappear through a portal set the older Nekashu alight. She jumped through the air toward the portal in pursuit of him, only for her path to be blocked by her little sister's back. Her momentum came to a hard stop when she crashed into the younger girl's back, sending her crumpling to the ground. A pained groan crawled its way out of her throat as she watched her sister step through the portal instead of her. Excuse me. From her position on the ground, Kuroka got an amazing view of Lilith stepping over her body and following Naruto and Kaneko through the portal. Ophis followed right behind the younger dragon. Soon, there was no one but Kuroka and the two angels left in the building. I should get going. Kuroka managed to force out in the midst of some nervous laughter. She began to climb back up to her feet in order to leave, only to be blown back down to the ground when Gabriel went blazing past her through the portal. To add insult to injury, the portal closed just as the winged blonde leaped through it, leaving her alone with the de facto leader of heaven. Hello there, Naya. Another nervous chuckle left her mouth as she stared up at the angel. She felt her stomach drop when the man sighed and took a step toward her. Completely unfamiliar with the angel, images of her imminent death flashed through her head as the angel grew closer. She could already feel the burn of one of his light spears piercing into her skin, filling her with holy energy and ending her short life. Come on. We have to go after my rash sister before she damages Naruto with her affection. The devil was surprised that instead of having a spear shoved into her back, a hand was placed in front of her face. She hesitated for a moment at the sight of the man's immaculate hand in front of her. Her hesitation cost her, however, when she was yanked up to her feet by the angel, causing a yelp to leave her mouth. Sorry for my roughness. We don't have much time and entering his house could prove to be difficult for me. With those words, and with the Nekasha wrapped in his grasp, Michael palmed the air in front of him. The area around his hand rippled for a brief moment before a luminescent portal appeared. The angel didn't waste any time as he stepped through the portal with a stunned Kuroka in tow. Fath, Naruto. The words erupted out of her mouth as she erupted out of the portal. Her momentum carried her, legs first, into the back of the couch. Her upper body went flipping over top of it, landing her head first on the ground in front of the chair. Naruto is gone. The angel's head snapped upward to meet the eyes of the younger Nekasha that had been present with Naruto in the 7th layer of heaven. What do you mean? I saw him leave heaven only moments ago. Where could he have gone? He could not have gotten far in such a short period of time. The words flew out of her mouth toward the seated girl. The relative harshness of her tone seemed to bounce off of her devil skin as Kaneko's expression stayed as calm as ever. He's fast. That answer was not enough for her. She had just gotten a piece of her father back and her patience for the Stonewall-esque girl was not up to par. Where did he go? She was met with silence. That silence was met with an uncharacteristic flaring of her anger. Why was this girl being so difficult? All she wanted were simple answers involving her father. Wasn't she entitled to that much? Excuse em. A sharp cough cut the angel off. She curbed the urge to flare her wings out and, instead, simply spun to face the source of the noise. She was met with the puffed-out cheeks of Kuroka. Naruto went out to get some fresh air. And, as long as Naruto is gone from the house, I'm in charge, Naya. So, I'm going to ask you to sit down and leave Naruto alone or I'll make you. To punctuate her point, the woman's magic seal appeared behind her. Its glow threw a dark, purple haze onto the entirety of the room. A wispy smoke started to emit from the edges of the seal, filling the room with its ominous fog. Gabriel was not afraid. The angel was known for her beauty, there was no doubt of that, but that did not take away from the fact that she was a participant in the Great War. She fought alongside her brother, father, and fellow angels. She shed the blood of devils and ended bloodlines. She waged war, face to face, against the original 4 great Satans. She was a warrior and a simple cat would not be enough to stop her. A pair of dragon gods, however, would be more than enough. From the corner of her eye, through the purple haze clouding the room, she spotted the duo standing in the hallway of the house. Any thought of further action was flushed from her mind at that sight. Her father hadn't raised a fool. Drawing the ire from the dragons could spell the death of her. I can't die with him so close. With that thought, she abandoned any thought of retaliation and visibly slumped in front of Nekasho, seemed to take this as a sign of her submission and allowed her magic seal to disappear from view, releasing the room of her smog. Fine, I'll sit. With an almost childish deposition about her, the angel took a wide step backward, then falls first into one of the room's many seats. With the room's main source of confrontation now effectively bottled, an awkward silence settled upon the room. With Gabriel too frustrated with her situation to speak, Kuroka silently glaring daggers at the angel and the natural quiet nature of Kaneko and the dragon duo, not a word was said in the room. And, not a word would be said until Naruto returned. A silent maple stood strong in the depths of Japan. Isolated from all except for her kin, she served as a beautiful but unneeded guardian to the small clearing she bordered. Every once in a while, the odd yet familiar creature would try to make its home in her bark. Their presence was always a welcome change, yet that change was always fleeting. For a being as old as she was, this was disappointing. The cycle of being used and abandoned had taken a toll on her. Her roots had twisted, turned gray and jagged. Her leaves were crinkling and pungent. Her bark, gashed and uneven. She was a fragment of what she once was. A twisted and jaded extension of Earth's mental state. That was until he arrived. He had come into her clearing, reeking of negative emotion. It rolled off of him in waves, poisoning the air with its toxicity. She recognized him. It was hard not to. Her mistress' infatuation with him made him famous amongst her kind. But the man she saw was not the one her mistress gushed about. She spoke of a man of serenity, of peace and trinity. This was not him. She had hesitated to inform her mistress of his presence. She didn't want her to see the man she cared about in such a negative state. She had already gone through so much. So, instead, she watched. She watched as the boy paced around her clearing, mumbling incoherent gibberish to himself. She watched as the emotions flashed across his face, shifting from negative to calm within moments. She watched as he finally settled on an expression of acceptance before he sat directly underneath her. Then she felt. It came at her in a sudden rush. She felt a slight pull at her reserves before the entire world was open to her. Her roots, untouched for decades, became unfurled as pure ecstasy flooded through her. Her bark pressed and heaved in an attempt to handle the purity of the energy she was consuming. She was in heaven. I must inform her of his presence immediately. As he breathed in, he felt the world around him breathe with him. And, as he released that breath, he felt the world bend and stretch in an attempt to mimic his actions. The wind in the clearing had stilled, leaving his body completely motionless. He was angry. Exhausted nor tired could properly describe how he felt right now. He was tired of being tired. His exhaustive tanks had run dry. The only thing left was anger. Who had deemed it acceptable for this burden to put placed on him? He hadn't agreed to this. He hadn't agreed to any of this. He wanted a life of simplicity. He deserved a life of simplicity. He sucked in a deep breath of cool air to relieve the burning mass that had begun to build up in his chest. His malignant thoughts gathered within the wind and banged erratically against his chest as he held the breath. He could feel them stab into his heart, heightening the emotional turmoil he was feeling. With each passing moment, the feeling grew worse and worse until it reached a terrible apex. Then it vanished. With a release of his breath, it went away. All the negative emotions, the malignant thoughts, the burning anger, all gone. Serenity sat in its place. A serenity that radiated out from its body and reached out to the world around him. Nature gladly accepted, taking a hold of his body and rooting him in place as it greedily sucked away. He felt her. Now, it was impossible not to whenever he entered sage mode. Despite her consuming presence, she felt distant at first. He felt her gradually move toward him, traveling hundreds of miles in the span of seconds. He could feel the buildup of her energy overtake his form and strain the limits of his sage abilities. As she grew closer, more of her energy and more of its taint followed her. His body buckled beneath the pressure, his teeth grit together in an attempt to maintain it all. He felt anger, hate, pressure, all attempting to tear him open and feast at his burdened heart. With a single breath, it all vanished. Just as I said, your matters have been dealt with and I have returned. His eyes came to a slow open, revealing Gia's naked form standing across the clearing. A small smile graced her face as she teetered around the forest's edge, her form swaying to and fro. You feel different, Gia commented as she took her first step toward Naruto's sitting form. Her smile grew in size as the soft grass welcomed the touch of her feet. "You feel godly." And, just like that, the energy that had been so abundantly flowing off of the object of her infatuation disappeared. It was a hard cut-off that left her oddly numb. The smile fell from her face in an instant as she stared down Naruto. "Why are you here?" Through their connection, he could feel the chill in his voice and it made her shiver. "I felt you through our connection. You were clearly distraught, so I came." She took a tentative step toward him as she spoke. Another step followed, then one, then another, until she was standing only a foot away from him. When he didn't rebuke her for the distance between them, she folded her legs beneath her and sat at his side. The two sat in silence for several minutes. Gia could feel the residual natural energy flowing off of his form but said nothing when he didn't re-establish their connection. She had a feeling that the boy had faced enough pressure as of recently. With that knowledge, she made the decision to do something she hadn't done in a long time. She would play the role of a mother. "What's bothering you, dear?" The words felt so foreign in her mouth. Dear was a title that was once meant for her true loved one. Her husband once bore that title until he decided to betray her and harm her children. Her eldest Sony held that title until he descended into a state cruelty that surpassed his own father. Once, the humans of Earth had held that title during the days when they cultivated her surface and cared for the resources she bestowed upon them. Those days were long gone. "I am not here to add to your burden, child. I'm only here to listen," she added after several moments of silence from the boy. She watched the lines of his face fold and crinkle. Despite his silence, she could basically hear the internal struggle he was facing through his varying expressions. "I've been through a bunch." Her expression perked up when the words left his mouth. Her hopes of finally learning more about the enigmatic blonde would finally be coming true. "I've watched my whole village get destroyed because of me. I've watched my friends sacrifice themselves for me. Thousands of people, with lives and families, died trying to protect me." If she hadn't been curious before, she was curious now. What type of life had this child been living where he had already gone through such hardship at such a young age? And, just when everything was going well, I get ripped away from my home and thrown here. I didn't ask for that. I fought for my home. I fought so that everyone, even me, could go home and try their best to restart their lives. A visible tremor ran through his body. Whether it was from anger or sadness, she could not tell. His head was hung down, allowing his hair to shade almost the entirety of his face. "So, I get here and I try to restart. I try to restart for myself and all the people who cared about me because I know they would have been angry if I at least didn't try. But, this time, I try to do things differently. I couldn't live my dream, but I could live a life worth living. Protect the people I love. I tried to do stuff simple. No more fighting ninjas, masked villains, or evil goddesses. Just a normal life." The boy's head came with a deep sigh. Gia was happy to see that no tears were present in his ears, yet the downcast expression that marked his face kept her happiness at bay. "That's all I really wanted. When the devils came around, I thought I could just ignore them. Then the angels and fallen angels got involved. Then the Greeks, then the Egyptians and the Hindus, and..." The blonde stopped to suck in a breath. "Now, I'm considered God in several religions. I hear more voices in my head than I usually do, and everyone either wants to kill or take advantage of me. I have a pair of dragons living in my house and I don't know what I'm supposed to do." A frown dipped across her face when she heard a slight hitch in his voice. Her body beckoned for her to reach out and ignore it. She did not. She felt welcomed when he didn't flinch or move away from her touch. "Child." His head swung up to meet her eyes. "As of right now, you are one of the most powerful and influential figures in the universe. I don't want to be, though. Tough luck." She spat out in reply. Her soft features turned into a deep scowl as she stared down the blonde. Sometimes in life we are given powers and responsibilities we did not ask for. Instead of laying down and letting them defeat us, it is up to us to utilize the abilities for our own benefit. And, you. Her call forced his full attention onto her. With your position and power, you have the entirety of the world in your hand. Every opportunity and every possibility sit at your fingertips. You are not at the end of anyone's rope. You hold the key to your own fate. You have the ability to throw this world in Armageddon or bestow peace onto it for the foreseeable future. He responded with silence, the thoughtful type. He could see some truth and a whole lot of reasoning within her words, even when he ignored the deity's strange interest in him. Do what you want, Naruto. If you want to raise the heavens, go ahead. If you to subjugate humanity, be my guest. If you wish to subjugate me, be my guest. She whispered the last part into his ear, her hand sliding uncomfortably far up his leg. Before he could react, she was up on her feet and her hand nowhere near his crotch. This is where the real fun begins, child. All the power in your hand and no one to stop you but yourself. To be young, she let out one last wistful sigh before melding into the ground below. The roots of her hair was the last he saw of her before she was gone, leaving him alone once more in the forest. Father, I come to you as a sinner. Thank you, God, for letting us win. Why'd you take my baby away from me? You were supposed to protect us. God, I just want my family to be happy. God, he's been gone for too long. I'm going to look for him. Just as she managed to lift herself halfway out of her seat, she felt a hand land against her midsection and force her back down into her chair. Before she could voice her protest, Ophi's stoic yet heated expression filled her vision. Sit. Stay. Indignation filled her at being addressed like an animal. She wanted to voice the indignation, but the combined looks from the pair of dragons and Nekashu in the room kept her silent. This was not how she expected her reunion with her father would go. She had trusted that, eventually, the man would come back to the world. His presence would bless the planet in its entirety and rid the world of its evil. She was beginning to realize how wrong she had been. Aren't any of you worried? With his power, he could be attracting all sorts of horrible creatures to himself. What if he could hope? She hoped that maybe appealing to the group of four's affection toward Naruto would allow her to make her grandscape. We're not worried. Proven wrong once again. Naruto can and will care for himself. Ophis spoke up this time. Her words were silently echoed by her clone as Lilith nodded her head along with her mother's words. Seeing that the two dragons weren't going to be of any help to her, Gabriel cut her eyes over to Kaneko. The look she received was enough to stonewall any of her remaining hopes. Naruto said he needed to be alone. It's that simple. Her upper canine bit deep into the tan flesh of her lips. She couldn't stand this feeling for much longer. His holy presence called her to charge out into the world and find him. She wanted to be close to him. After so long without his grace, she needed to be by his side. Don't you want to with him, though? He seemed upset when he left. Don't you want to be by his side to help him? Yes. The response made her blink. She hadn't expected an affirmative response so quickly from the girl. Before she could even open her mouth to add on statement, Kaneko was speaking once again. I want to be next to him every single moment of the day. It's one of the few things I want. But, he needs time alone. I know he'll come back. Because of I'm here. So, I am not worried. Certainty. Nothing but absolute certainty could be heard in the girl's voice. What she spoke, she believed in without a shadow of doubt, and Gabriel was finding it hard to find a reason not to believe the girl herself. The conviction in her voice spoke to her. It reached her in a way that she hadn't expected from someone so young and so devilish. How are you so sure? She couldn't help but question. Because, I know Naruto. As if God himself had been listening in on their conversation, the door swung open not a moment after the girl spoke. Naruto came walking into the room, his arms hanging loosely by his side and his face sporting a small smile. The smile seemed to grow when he saw Kaneko, yet tapered off when he saw Gabriel sitting in his living room. Father. Her throat seized up, forcing her voice down to a whisper. A surge of emotion erupted from her chest and filled her body. The corner of her eyes began to sting as her vision of Naruto blurred. I'm not your dad, but... Gabriel. His voice silenced her. The look he sent her way kept her in place and her mouth closed. I'm not your dad. Your dad, for whatever reason, decided to give me his powers, but I am not him. I will never be him. The stinging in her eyes grew more painful at her words. Her throat grew thick as a well of emotion seized her by the neck, making the act of breathing almost impossible. A stab of pain, part physical and part emotional, shot through her heart, forcing those built-up tears down her cheeks. Before she could cry her eyes out, she felt a hand land on the top of her head. She looked up, her teary eyes meeting with Naruto's blue ones. I need you to get Michael here. The sound of a toilet flushing caught the attention of everyone in the room. Their heads collectively turned toward the bathroom as its door swung open with a creak. Out came strutting Michael, his hands folded neatly behind his back while a pleasant left his lips in a hum. "Oh my!" the angel exclaimed at the sight of Naruto. "I didn't expect you back so soon. You have a very nice restroom, I must say. Thank you." That was Naruto's tentative response to the angel's odd compliment. He had never been complimented on the quality of his bathroom before and was having a hard time processing it. "Wait." With a quick shake of his head, he sent the bathroom compliment to the back of his mind. "You're here. That makes this easier." The inquisitive look Michael sent his way forced the boy to suck in a deep breath. Was he entirely sure this was what he wanted to do? Did he really want to throw himself into this position? Was it worth the trouble? Was it worth the freedom? "Michael." He exhaled as he spoke. "I'm going to be a god. That's wonderful. I'll alert Heave. Before you do anything." The blonde held up a finger, stopping the angel in his tracks. "I'm going to tell you that there's going to be some changes. A lot of changes. If I'm going to be a god, I'm going to do it my way. The Uzumaki way." That's it for part 11. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.